Welcome back. Our next um, event is a roundtable discussion on engaging families in the hobby. Um, and if you, when you get your edition of the NER coupler this year, you'll see something that will give you an idea of what we're talking about here, which is a couple of young kids running our division's layout at the Springfield show. This live discussion is led by Michelle Kempema, Executive Director of the Colorado Railroad Museum and a leader of the New Women in Model Railroading Special Interest Group. Michelle, you can figure out which one she is, probably. Joining Michelle is Blaine Holbrook, who runs the Pizza Box program that was featured at the NMRA booth in the Amherst show, and John Gardberg, who runs the Rocky Mountain Train Show. If you have questions or comments for the group, please put them in the chat. Michelle, take it away.
All right. Well, I was asked to put together kind of a roundtable about engaging families in the hobby, and I thought of all the different ways that there are to engage families in the hobby. And so I brought on John and Blaine, and we all do 3 different things between us. So I thought it would be interesting to kind of go through these and then answer people's questions and see how we can help others engage families in the hobby. So I put together kind of a little slideshow among all of us. I'm going to go ahead and share that now, and hopefully it will work. So what I was thinking about when I invited John and Blaine to come on is that train shows are sometimes the very first exposure that people have to the hobby. They might see a sign for a train show. Oh, my kid likes trains. That would be fun. Let's go to a train show. And so I'm going to have John speak first about Rocky Mountain Train Show and ways that they engage families. And then, of course, there's museums like the Colorado Model Railroad Museum where I'm at. And oftentimes people get drugged there as part of the family at a holiday. And what are we going to do with our out-of-town guests? So we're going to take them to a museum. And so we see people who are brand new to the hobby, who have nothing to do with the hobby. We also see people who are already in the hobby. So we see a big gamut also. And we kind of have some programming, but it's not often as long term as what Blaine does. And so a lot of my programming at the museum, what we do is very contained. We'll go to a classroom for a few days, or we'll do something for 6 weeks, or we'll do something a little more contained. And so then I thought, well, what about ongoing and growing in the hobby through the years? So that's Blaine. And so we'll have Blaine rounded up with what they do with their pizza box programs. So the first thing we're going to do is have John talk about the Rocky Mountain Train Show.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is John Gardberg. I'm one of the co-chairs of the Rocky Mountain Train Show that's held in Denver, Colorado. Our next show is actually April 1st and 2nd. One of the things that we've always strived to do is engage children in our show, in some way in our shows. So some of the things that we do, we have a train station challenge, which is where parents and kids can go around with a sheet of paper and have it gets stamped. So we have 7 to 8 stations they visit, and each train station challenge has the name of a train station in the Colorado area or in the Rocky Mountain region. When that's completed, they turn it in, and it's used as a raffle to win a ready-to-run set. Then we have the information station, which goes hand in hand with the train station challenge. These will be informational sheets. Kind of if you are of a certain age, you may have received like Weekly Reader when you were a kid in school, or you're familiar with like Wikipedia, where it's a short article about something of interest. And we're going to provide both hard copy and online versions of this, where kids can go online and grab this information to be used for their, whether it's within the hobby or maybe a project in school. The junior engineer program, if that sounds familiar to anyone in the NMRA, it's because it was actually started at the WISE division, and I first encountered it at Train Fest about 3 or 4 years ago. And with their permission, we brought that program into our show. And as soon as our local region of the NMRA, which is the Rocky Mountain region, heard about it, they're like, hey, can we help out? And so they're actually a big part of that program at our shows. And that's really great. There's 3 levels where kids go and work on layouts or operate trains on layouts, identify items on layouts, and interview some of the layout operators for information to fill out the sheets. Then we have the kids. So the kids finish up the program and they get a certificate, and they get to take that home with them. Then we have the kids area. So at our show, kids area consists of train races, kid in a cab, and some other activities. Sometimes they include activities from the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, like boxcar races. And these, again, it's to engage kids in model railroading. They get to actually operate trains on our layouts. And with train races, it's a intersecting figure eight where trains can actually run into one another. And the goal, obviously, is to get your train across the finish line. A kid in a cab, each kid is assigned a transformer that controls a train, S gauge and O scale 3 rail, if you're curious. And they can just run trains in a loop, because that's how a lot of it started in model railroading to begin with. This year, the Youth in Model Railroading is featuring a make and take, where you can make and take trees, and we're hoping to expand that in the future to be actual models. And soon we're going to be releasing information. Well, not us, but the Colorado Model Railroad Museum will be releasing information about tracks, and there'll be more on that later, hopefully later in the next 3 to 6 months. Setting some deadlines, Michelle.
I know, we've got to get on this. So, yeah, I didn't include in my presentation anything about what we do at the train show, but we also bring a Lego train, the LGB train that has the Lego decks, and that's a really good way to interface with the public. All kids love Legos that way. We do have the boxcar racing, and I know Blaine has boxcar racing too, don't you?
Yes.
and I first saw it when Blaine did it in Salt Lake City. So then we built one to take to the Rocky Mountain Train Show. Yeah, and we've also done things like small clinics like tree making and things like that help introduce the kids at the train show to our programs. And so our programs all kind of go in between each other, so we all support each other. So thank you, John, for talking about that. I'll go through what we do at the museum quickly next, kind of our self-contained programs that we do. If you've ever visited the Colorado Model Railroad Museum, you'll realize pretty quickly that we have no space. We have no classroom space. So we have to go outside of our building to do our programming. And so we have an amazing layout, and we do a little bit of programming inside. And so the first thing I'm going to show you is something we can actually do on site. And this is our preschool programming. This is a Lego Duplo programming set, and you'll see that the kids build their own track. They build their own train out of the Lego Duplos, and then it also has an iPad programming features. So the colors inside the track dictate what the train does, and so it's six lessons in the curriculum, and we've been doing this one with preschoolers, and it's very, very fun. So one of the few things we can do in-house. This one we can do in our lobby, but it limits us to very few kids. This is the Woodland Scenics Scenery Wedge kits. These can be done at train shows. They can be done pretty much anywhere. We do them in public school classrooms. We make it a one-day thing. It takes about 2 hours to get in, set up, get the kids, tell them what we're doing, and make it. So I say it's a 1 hour project, but the actual project time is 1 hour, but you got to leave room on each side. So that's one of the things that we've had really good luck with. We've probably made hundreds and hundreds of these. Then we went up to just square pieces of foam. Give every kid a building and let's make something. And we did this also in a public school, just kind of a simple one-day activity. Then we went to Salt Lake City and saw Blaine's pizza boxes and decided to make something with track on it for our kids. But we also did this as a 2 Saturday program. So we did it over 2 days, and they completed it in the 2 Saturday workshops. But we only did it one time because we were so space constrained. So I'm super jealous of the space that Blaine has, but we did it once. So then we actually worked with a public school to come in daily for 12 weeks. We came in for an hour a day. Then we went to Woodland Scenics and bought the big kits. And I use these pictures because I don't know if you're actually thinking of working with kids. Trash bags make amazing aprons. And this is how you flip them upside down, cut a neck hole, cut armholes, and the kids don't get dirty. And so these took a long time. We also did them over a summertime with Boys and Girls Clubs, and we did 2 different Boys and Girls Clubs houses, and we put them together and operated them together at the end of summer. So those are kind of our self-contained programming. Here's another look at what we did with Boys and Girls Clubs and creating those woodland scenics pieces. And then we also have virtual programming. This was much more of a response to COVID, but we have been asked about doing some virtual classroom things. We have a lot of kits already put together from 2020 where we did monthly STEAM lessons with kids. We always tied it back to modeling, like paleontology. You use plaster to set a bone and move it, and you also use plaster to build a mountain. There's art in railroading, there's art in modeling, there's art. So we took a lot of different topics. We did a lot of different things with this program. So those are just a real quick look at what we did. And now I'm going to pass it over to Blaine to talk about what he does.
Well, we do the pizza box layouts, but we use a lot of the ideas that have already been discussed here. We go to train shows and we take our pizza box, we take the pizza box, but the boxcar races, the demolition derby, the tree making clinics, engine races, just anything that we can do to attract people to us. And we have these layouts there, and we ask people if they would like to participate. The idea is they have a little bit of fun with some hands-on stuff, and then they're ready to try something a little more aggressive, like building a layout. It takes roughly 6 months. We meet once a month at a train store, which is very convenient. And we have around 30 layouts in the morning or more, 30 in the afternoon. We have around 30 volunteers that come in and help. But as you can see, people are very, very excited about doing this. And it's long-term. The idea is to get people involved and then keep them. And so once they complete these little 2x2 layouts and we get them running, we're hoping they get bored with it in 2 months. And we're constantly sending out an invitation to come and build a bigger layout and do more. We've got people on their third layouts. The definition of a pizza box layout is anything you can put in your car with your family and bring to class. A 2x6 layout is fine. It's 12 square feet, but once you start putting plaster on it, then they start getting a little cumbersome. But below that, anything that size we can do. We don't even do turnouts the first time. We just, as you see, there's no raised roadbed, there's no bridges or trestles. It's just use your imagination and see what comes out of it. And
Blaine, I love that this one has Coca-Cola and cake and candy on it.
That is Wreck-It Ralph. And the other sister of this gal did a Toy Story.
Oh, neat.
This is a product in production right here. You can see a bunch of people building their layouts. They learn different ways to do things. In fact, why don't you go on to the next slide? Mm-hmm. So we can usually get this far in the first meeting with get the track down, get it soldered, get the structure started, even to plaster cloth. We can usually send them home with plaster cloth. Then they come back and it slows down as they start adding more and more details. You got to have tunnel portals. This is a snow scene. This one obviously is not finished yet because they've got to plaster the bottom of the river and the lake and put some water features in. But this was at one of our shows. We don't require them to be finished, just show people what you're doing. And people like seeing things that are in production because then they can see how to do it themselves. But so anyway, it works. We have hundreds of these layouts now, hundreds and hundreds of them. And we take them to shows and we use them to bring new people in. What's interesting about this one that's kind of reddish, this is Southern Utah. And the boy is 12 years old, but his mother wanted to help. And she went and bought the foam cutter, hot wire foam cutter. And she did all the foam cutting. And this is both of their first times modeling. This is a product of the first time.
That's really neat.
And I was totally amazed. And one on the right, the little boy, we ran out of plaster cloth, so we went in the bathroom and grabbed some tissue paper and plastered the tissue paper, and it worked just the same as plaster cloth. So sometimes a shortage can cause an appropriate response in creativity. And you can see all the layouts around behind there. This is our demolition derby.
Oh, okay. Here, I'll go on.
Yeah. The boys try to knock each other's train off the tracks, and the girls try to avoid it. So,
Oh, were they crossing the middle?
right when they cross in the middle, it's interesting to see the difference in the attitudes between young men and young women. But
That's funny.
they really have a ball at that. And here are our results as of January. We have over 300 plus layouts that have been built. We have right now about 460 families involved. And if you need to know head count, that would be right around 1,200 participants. We have folks that are sending me pictures of 4x8 layouts they're now building in their home. The little boy that I told you about that, well, maybe I didn't. He put a turnout on his layout, on his second layout, and he ballasted the throw bar into the ballast and glued it in. Of course, that meant the turnout wouldn't work. So we worked with it. He said, oh, I'll just build another one. So he started on his third layout, and he can't get it in the car. It's too big. I'm going, this is what I'm after. We're after building people into to enjoy modeling and get them really, really heavily hooked on it. And again, we use social media to an extreme degree. We've got a manager, a social media manager, and she'll watch me. And when our classes usually fill up real quick. And if we have any space open, she'll throw it out on Instagram, and that finishes it up.
And then people sign up. Do you have an online sign up, or do they have to contact somebody?
It's all online. We use Sign Up Genius.
Okay.
And so we've got our program already scheduled all the way through September. In June, we have they call it Summer Palooza. It's a fun Utah activity where all kinds of things come together, rock climbing, all kinds of crafts. Model roading is just one of hundreds of things at this big outdoor show. And we'll pick up a number of people that want to come build, but we show these layouts there. And also we've got, I don't know if you've heard of Stadler. They build powered rail cars, like passenger cars. And they have a plant in Salt Lake, and we'll be having a walkthrough of their plan. They're going to open it up for our group to come through and look at them building actual train cars.
Oh, that's neat. So you have like an outing for your group.
Yeah, we go on layout tours. I'm trying to also get a visit to Trax, which is our heavy rail passenger service here. It's not light rail. Stadler does light rail, but anyway, we have a lot of fun.
This slide we probably should have had earlier, but do you want to talk through all the things that you do? You do these at train shows and places like you're talking about where you go?
Yes, this is what we do at train shows. So like John, we use train shows to attract people into our program. And I've had a couple of train shows say, well, we want the kids' fun stuff, but we don't want the pizza box stuff. And I said, well, you don't understand. This is the process by which we get people into the hobby. So if you can't do the pizza box, then we'll choose another show. So we're getting to where we can be a little bit more picky now and take our whole program to the shows to attract new people into our program. It's the low-hanging fruit, if you want to look at it that way. It's a lot easier to go out to a train show because people go there like trains. You go to Summer Palooza. We also have other children's museums. We go there, and you don't get quite as many, and the interest is varied. And the ones I get in trouble a lot with going to specialized groups like after-school groups. We have very little success keeping people in our program. Now, others might have a better success than that, but our program is designed for ongoing, continual modeling and introducing people and keeping them.
Right. And you're wanting the families to stick with them through the whole childhood's growing up in the family there.
Yeah.
So,
The thing we found out with some of the group programs is the parents aren't with the children, and that just destroys
yeah.
everything we're trying to do. We have to have.
We're going to talk about that in just a minute.
Yeah,
So,
the NMRA requires it.
okay, the next slide, because you have a more specialized long-term thing, the next slide I wanted to ask you about, because people might have questions about this. How did you find space where you can make a mess?
Well, right now we're over carpet at a train store, so we've learned how to clean up. But our first place we were at, they had linoleum floors, and it was actually a science lab in a children's museum. And they had a change in management there, and we were invited to leave. And then we went to a bookstore, and there was a space there, and we were over carpet. We just laid some stuff down and protected the carpet, and we outgrew that place. We got to the point where we were hanging out the windows. And so finally, one of the train stores said, we like what you're doing. We've got space. You can take all of the hall and 2 classrooms. And would that be enough? And I said, well, we can fill it. And right now we are. In fact, sometimes after the National Train Show in 2019, the only space available was 4 space. And we filled it.
You did fill the 2019 National Train Show.
We did. So
I got to see that. Okay, so my next question for you, how do you provide, and this is something we kind of do the same thing, but you have a slide for it. So I thought we could talk through, when you are working with families, you need to have certain safety things ready. And I liked your list, so go for it.
Okay, well, when folks come in, we do have some instructions, and we do instruct our teachers to make sure that they understand that we don't handle anything hot or sharp to the children. We hand it to the parents. Direct your comments to the parents, show the parents what to do, and let them teach their children. That kind of adds a little bit of space between you and the kids. And you don't know if the children understand you. Some are a little slower. Vocabularies are an issue. So if you teach the parents, move on to the next one. And we do like to know about allergies. We had someone allergic to alcohol. Now, how much alcohol do we use?
Yeah, you have to be really careful then.
Yeah, we have to talk about allergies to make sure we do obtain criminal background checks. There's all kinds of ways you can get background checks. People's employment, religious organizations require background checks. So if they can bring in a certificate and it uses the state background system, then yeah, we'll accept that. Even the concealed weapons permit is based on the same.
Do you ask them to bring in their own thing then, or do you offer the ability to check for them? Like we can check, the state of Colorado has an online system that cost me $8 to background check a volunteer or someone in working with our youth. Do you have something like that?
We don't have something like that yet. They just moved, so they may have now. I haven't gotten any updates on it, but it's time for us to do background checks again. They should be done every couple of years or so. That's what I'm used to. I used to be in Cub Scouts, and the background checks were every 2 years.
Yeah, and I think the Scouts have definitely a best practice model for background checking.
Yeah.
So
But that's good to know. I'm going to go check and see if we can do it online. That would be wonderful.
Yeah, so we use this. It's the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. I don't know if every state has that, so but we have that ability. So okay, so the next one I was going to have you talk about is how you get your volunteers.
Well, at first we had to drag them in. That was hard. We only had 2 or 3 volunteers when we started, and they would go back to our group and talk about how much fun it was and how they learned different techniques. And one by one, a few more would volunteer, then a few more. And then we actually stepped outside of the NMRA, since our beginner series clinics are not subject to the 3 strikes rule. We can use non-NMRA teachers. And what a good way to get folks rubbing shoulders together, NMRA and non-NMRA, is to have them teach families how to build layouts. So that started to expand. Now we're up to 30 volunteers.
Nice.
But it was a building process. It took a while. And we had to deal with some I don't like to use the word toxic, but some unhappy people
It's interesting.
that didn't
People
like
getting
what we were
volunteers to work
doing.
with youth, sometimes people who be amazing at it are afraid. They're afraid to step up. And if they don't understand how actually easy it is to do. But yeah, that's
Yeah, if you
and
want to do it, don't be surprised if you get a 4-page letter telling you what you've done wrong. So
yeah.
I just
And
laughed and went on
yeah.
doing what we were doing because we could see the fruits of our labors.
So the last slide that I have for you to talk about is the NMRA youth at-risk youth policy, at-risk at-risk persons policy. Let me say it correctly. Um, I know that your program has been thoroughly through this. Do you have anything words of advice you can give people? I think this is such a great best practice document for the whole industry of modeling for anybody wanting to work with youth. I think this is definitely
Yes,
the way to
we
do.
actually have a sheet that we hand out. In fact, the NMRA's attorney has just gone over it, improved the language. We talk about some of our unique problems we have here. Number one, you must keep the children must be always in the line of sight of the parents. They can never be outside of that arena. Yeah, so I've had to address some things. Parents would want to slip into the train store and leave their kids building. No, you can't do that. Here's our written policy. You need to take them with you. We're just too busy and we can't watch them. And the other problem we ran into is we had a little gal that was just a whiz at ballasting. And one of our teachers wanted that child to come home, his home, and ballast the track at his house and pay her $1 a foot. And we didn't know about it until after. And so no, you can't do that.
Right.
It's against the rules. And he holds a pretty high position in the NMRA. And I'm going, oh.
So one of the things this policy says is that we work with families.
Yeah,
And
well, not
that's
on a
the whole
one-to-one basis. In a store or in a classroom, you've got lots of people. It's a public place, and there's not much that can go wrong. If you start moving people and going to someone's home, that's where I worry about what's going to happen.
That's a
And so we
definite
come out with
no-no.
a policy that we will do layout tours, and they will be publicly announced through our regular internet channels. And we'll have 3 or 4 NMRA teachers there, and we will have several families at the same time. So it'll be pretty public. But we don't go to someone's home just one-on-one. That's just forbidden.
Well, and one of the things that I wanted to say here is that if people are watching this and they're in an NMRA division and they would like to work with families, the at-risk persons policy, it's not a constricting thing, it is a freeing thing. And it gives us the ability to safely work with families, and it gives us structure. And it's a best practice in how you handle things to make sure that your division is safe and that everyone involved is safe. And so I know some people are like, oh, there's all these policies and rules and regulations. Well, they're there for a reason, but they're there so that you can have fun in a safe space. And so I want to take the negative stigma away from this and
Thank
make
you.
it the positive thing that it actually is. So,
And we have a little meeting before we have the people come in to work on their layouts. We have a little meeting and we kind of go over some of the safety procedures every single month. We point to our first aid kit, and yes, we've had some injuries. I'm probably the worst. I almost cut the end of my finger off with a pair of scissors. So I needed the safety procedures more than anyone. But we go over safety and all of these policies with the adults. And I turn around and send it out to all of the people that participate. All 460 receive an email with the document attached to it saying, here's our compliance standards and here's what we need to do to keep you safe and keep us safe. And it means we can have fun.
that's correct. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing and bring us back just to talk through some stuff. And we can bring up a slide if we want to for any explaining. So welcome back, everybody. I was going to talk about age of participation. I know I do preschool. I think the museum might be the only thing other than maybe at a train show. John, do you have any specific programming for the youngest age bracket of preschool? Oh, you're muted though. Oh, where'd you go? There you are.
Okay, sorry about that. So the junior engineer program is set up for kids 5 years and older. So for the kids that are, I guess, toddler age, or the kids who can start to kind of understand, what they're seeing, that's what the train station challenge is for. That it's what just having like the ride on train is for, so they can enjoy themselves and think of trains as being fun. Also, what doesn't hurt is having Lego layouts at a show and Lego activities, something that they're familiar with already, maybe at home. And then there's also the layouts, so that they can just see miniaturized worlds in action.
Right. And then I also see, I don't remember which booth it is at the Rocky Mountain Train Show. Somebody brings the wooden track and trains, which we have play tables at the museum too for that preschool age group, just that hands-on touching stuff. And then from 5 and up, obviously you do have the train show. Blaine, what is your age group for your programming?
Well, our printed age range is from 5 to 100.
Ah, that's a good
But
age.
we've had people bring 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds. The parents are there for themselves, and that's okay.
So I would ask you guys, what have been some things that you've learned through the process that you would share with people about working with families? Blaine, you probably have a lot. You've told us a few already.
It's fun to see children and parents just thoroughly involved in just plaster all the way up to their arms. We have a little girl that was announced. She does not like to be dirty. She walked out just covered in plaster all over her and grinning from ear to ear. And the mother was in shock. And I was going, yeah, just give them the right incentive and they'll enjoy it.
Do you ever get pushback from parents about being involved in what they do with the kids?
Actually, the parents are pushing us to do more. I'm surprised how many adults love this stuff. When I started this, I actually set my target market as the 25 to 45-year-olds. That was the target. Now, how do you reach this group of people? Well, they're most interested in their families. All right, let's do something that targets their families. And so that's where we went with the pizza box idea, was to involve that group. And we have about 20% to 30%. We have a lot of 80-20 stuff going on with us. Like immediately 20% of the people, after they build the first layout, go on and build the second one, just immediately. And we have about 20% of our group that are adults that are building for themselves.
Okay. Well, that's okay. They're in the hobby, right? They're doing models.
That's the whole point. We're just here to help people and keeping a positive attitude. There's going to be some roadblocks thrown at you. We had a big roadblock thrown at us in 2019, and we got our heads together and figured a way around the roadblock and continued on. And then the roadblock went away, and now we're really happy.
We're all on the same track. So, John, I'm going to start with you on this question because I know Blaine's answer, and it's a good one. At the train show, do you see, because they always say, this comes from my women in model railroading hat, do you see that girls are as excited about the junior engineer program as boys are?
Yes. And usually I have a picture of a young lady. We have to be careful, like when we put pictures of kids, on the internet. So one of the positives, if there was one from Corona, was that at our first show, after most of the restrictions have been lifted except for masks, is a girl holding up her junior engineer certificate with her mask on, and you can just see in her eyes how happy she is what she accomplished. So,
I would say we see the same thing at the museum. The girls are absolutely every bit as much as involved. And Blaine, tell us about yours.
You want a fun experience I had? One was with the boxcar races. Can I tell that one?
Sure.
The boxcar races really attract a line. People build the boxcar and then go race them. And we went through a real press, and I was exhausted. I was gathering all the parts together. And during this little lull, a little hand came up over the desk. over the table. I couldn't even see the top of the head. And I thought, oh, you're kidding me. And the hand came in the direction of the body or the shell. So I pushed it closer to the edge and it disappeared off. A few minutes later, or a minute later, a hand come over again, and this time in the direction of the weight. And I thought, this little gal, or it turned out to be a little girl, this little person has been watching. And the weight disappeared, and I heard this snap as the two fit together, and the squeal of delight. I couldn't even see the child, but this squeal was worth $1 million. Then the hand came over the table again, this time in the direction of the underframe. I was, a little kid figured this out. It disappeared. I pushed it closer. It disappeared a little bit longer, but then there was the snap, and I knew that went together. And I was starting to grin from ear to ear because this little child was putting this together. And then, of course, the trucks and the screws disappeared, and I waited and I waited. Then this little child comes around the table and hands the boxcar up to me upside down. I thought, oh, she wants me to put the trucks on. So I reached for the trucks and she pulled the boxcar back. She didn't even have the vocabulary yet to tell me what she wanted. Then she reached the boxcar out to me again, extended her arms. Okay, I'll hold the boxcar. I held the boxcar. She put the trucks on and did it correctly.
Yeah.
And I was in absolute shock. I picked up the box. It said age 14. And I threw the box in the trash.
I don't know if people know, but with boxcar racing, the kids actually build their boxcars. They start with parts, build the boxcar, and then they race it.
Yeah.
And so it's a really fun program. That's a great story.
It's not about racing the boxcar. It's about modeling.
Right.
And then when the model is completed, they can go put it on the track and see that it works.
Okay,
And
yeah.
now they're fun and excited. And then we move them on to the next point that they could be excited about. But there's stories like that about the pizza box layouts. I've got lots of stories, but that's my favorite one.
Okay, Ed, over to you.
Say with that, the layout that we have that we take to the train shows, get as many girls come and run it as boys, and a lot of like mom wants to try it out too. You know, she's interested as well. So
We run about 55% female in our
Yep.
group.
So that's kind of the questions I had. Ed, are there any from the audience that we need
I've
to?
got a couple from the audience here. Somebody asked why pizza box and not T-track.
The reason I went pizza box over T-track, I thought about the two, but I really wanted someone to be able to take a layout home with them and run it 24/7.
Right.
So they tend to be a closed loop, so they can run.
Yeah, it's a constant loop, and it gives us an opportunity to complete a operating layout and then move on to the next one, keeping them within their home. We don't have a lot of T-track here in Utah close, and that was another deciding factor. And our cost to do a pizza box is around $25 to $30. If you do one T-track, it's about the same price, but you have to do more than one to get an operating layout. And so the cost was another factor to be able to put it together. But I love the idea of people having a layout in their home.
So I'll talk to we use T-track. I don't think I presented it. I don't think I did a slide on our T-track program, but we do T-track with kids. And what we ended up doing to make it feasible for the same problems that Blaine had is we built the end pieces and we built a layout that we have in the lobby, which we took out during COVID, but and kids could bring in and pop their piece in, run trains while they're at the museum, and then take their piece home with them. We also take it to the Rocky Mountain Train Show, which we had it there last year, didn't we, John? And so that allows us to take our T-track out. I forgot we were actually in 3 booths last year at the train show. So it, but it does have those limitations, like Blaine said, that the kids can't just take it home and run a train on it, but it does keep them coming back to make more. And we made it possible because we're open as a museum, they could come in anytime and run it.
Yeah, it's not like, you get good, bring it to the train show next year, and we'll do it again. Yeah. Okay. Somebody else asked how long you've been doing these programs? And
Over
I guess
7 years.
the corollary being, he says, how long have you been doing it long enough to know if we have more layouts to operate on now? From have there been any idea of does this turn into people who turn into the hobby, or don't we know yet?
Oh, we've been doing this 7 years, and we have had a number of people who are now on the board of directors that came from Pizza Box of our Northern Utah division, some that are in vice president position in other clubs. I sat down and made a list for Gordy Robinson of a number of people that have joined, and that was without trying. You have to remember, we were kind of forbidden entity operating outside of the NMRA for a number of years. So we didn't bring people to the NMRA. What we were interested in doing was, if you start building at home, send me photos of what you're doing so I can see what you're doing. So for a long time there, I knew people were building 2 and 3 and 4 layouts. We had one going to G scale, we had one going to Z, and one switch from HO to, from N scale to HO. So we've had a number of active families just continue going, and we did have one go into T-Track. They built a couple, 2, 3 pizza box layouts and said, yeah, we can afford this. And so they started buying module after module after module, and that's fine.
Our kids in our youth program have many different places they go. 2 of them operate almost weekly on our layout now, and now that they're in high school, and they're fully certified, and they build their own trains. They're actually doing their own scratch building. It's amazing to see what they're doing. One of them does have a home layout, and one has a garden railroad at home, even though he brings HO into the museum. And that's his project. We also have kids that were in our program are involved in other things like youth and model railroading in Denver, Larry Price's program. We've had kids be involved in that, or they operate on other layouts like the Colorado Rail Linkers. They often have kids that are overlapping into our program. So as a museum, we're kind of like a gathering place from many programs. So that's kind of how we work. And then the train show, John, I mean, obviously and I see the kids at the train show operating on different layouts everywhere. So it's kind of fun to go. And then I see them grown up operating on layouts at the train show. And that's really fun when I see a kid that was in our programming and now he's an adult out there operating. We've been doing youth programs for about 7 or 8 years also. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I can say we built our layout in 2016, and again had the same interruption that everybody else did. But it's at least in our area, it's one of the few things that doesn't have a sign on it that says "Please don't touch." No, come here. Here's the NCE throttle. Go ahead, run the trains. And oh, really? We can tell? Oh, yeah, sure. Somebody asked what kits you use for the boxcar racing. What do you?
Athearn Blue Box.
Athearn Blue Box. Okay.
And the couplers come off. Get rid of the couplers.
hit the train show and buy them up at $5 a box or something. Okay.
I have to give a shout out to Intermountain, because Intermountain gave us the cars that we use on ours. So we have all identical box cars, and Intermountain gave us those kits to use. So that was a sponsored thing.
Okay, which kind of leads into another question that I had. If you're a division, say, without a lot of funds up in someplace, how do you get started in this? What do you use for seed money, and how do you sustain it financially? You get stuff donated. How does it work?
We have a lot of donations. We went to entities for cash, and we went to manufacturers for products, and we have been blessed on both sides. We have a nice, healthy bank account, and I mean healthy, I don't mean overboard. It's enough to get us through a year. Okay. And we have enough materials. Once you start, you'll be surprised. People come out of the woodwork with extra track, with cars and locomotives that they want to get rid of. buildings, plaster. We had two 5-gallon buckets of plaster donated to us. So we end up with lots of donations, and we're very grateful for them.
Yes.
Okay.
And I think one thing that we did too is local businesses are actually really interested in supporting activities for kids. I think if you asked around, you might be surprised how many, even small businesses would donate $100 or $200. Youth programs are one of the easiest things for us to fund is anything that is teaching and educational and hands-on. And so people are generous and donations come in, and you might talk to your local train store, your local museum like us, because we pass a lot of our donations straight into programming, and so, yeah, people are generous.
Do you like put something up? If I don't know, if Athern donate something, do you put something up so that people
I
see
do.
that?
We
Okay.
do.
Oh yeah. In fact, we have our group write thank you cards. They're handmade cards. They're big. There might be 12 inches by 14 inches or 14 by 18 inches. Great big cards, and write all their names on it and tell thank you to the manufacturer, and then we'll mail a card to the manufacturer, and they put it on their Facebook. And
We've done it as simply as printing it on a piece of paper and putting it in our booth at the train show. And then we've done nice signs too. So, I mean, you don't have to do a lot of money to thank somebody. You just need to print it on a piece of paper and say, this was sponsored or donated by, and just thank them.
Yeah.
I was interested, Michelle, that you said this is a STEAM thing, not STEM. Somebody asked about STEM. I'm by trade a music teacher, so I'm always glad to see that people recognize this is also an art. This isn't just
Right.
engineering and science. This is it's an art as well as, in fact, that was what the original thing was, the art of model railroading. Back
I
in.
know. And
So
there is no hobby. I don't think there's a hobby that has as much STEAM, every single one of them, science, technology, engineering, art, and math, as model railroading. It has every bit of it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, we got another question here. What are some online or digital means, methods that you're using to attract the generations that grew up with the internet?
We are using Instagram, and we have a social manager, and they post for us and take lots of pictures. Oh, we take tons of pictures. And also videos. We go at our train shows. We will invite the social media to come. What was interesting, as soon as we got one social manager working with us, we had 5 others pop out of the woodwork. And so our invites go out to 151,000 followers of these people.
That's great.
Cool.
We use our YouTube channel. Facebook is, I know my kids tell me Facebook's for old people, but Facebook is the way we actually reach the parents for the families, because that's where they are. Our Facebook events do really well. People follow that. We have Instagram. We even have TikTok. And we actually have a lot of young rail fans following our TikTok. And so that's interesting. So we try to stay up with it. I wish I had more time and talent to do those things. But yeah, that's what we do. What about the train show, John?
Facebook. Right now, through Facebook advertising, we can actually see who is responding to what kind of ads. So we have ads specifically geared towards the hobbyist and the rivet counter side of things. We also have Facebook ads that are generally designed to attract families by using audience targeting. And we can actually look at what ads are hitting what groups and if it's working correctly. And one of the age groups that we normally see when we just do organic posts is 55 years of age and older. When we start doing the ones towards kids and the general public, I shouldn't say towards kids, but things that parents would be interested in, that's when we start seeing the demographic change, and it's mid 20s to mid 40s. So
And Blaine mentioned something key earlier, is that he has online signups and we do online signups. And I think that really helps parents be able to sign up for things. They don't have to drive all the way in to sign on a piece of paper. Like, so we are using technology in those ways to make it easy to join us in what we're doing.
Somebody out there asked again, what kits do you use? You obviously weren't paying attention earlier. But it's basically a shake the box kit is what you're looking at. Athearn Blue Box and maybe an AccuRail kit. Something goes together in about 3 pieces.
Yes.
Well,
Right.
the ask for the boxcar race is yes. For the pizza box, it's all scratch.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah, if they're asking about kits for like the building, we use master modules for T-Track. I mean, that's the only kits that we buy. But
Yeah. I think they're talking about the boxcar racing.
oh, the
once again.
boxcar racing.
I
Okay.
mean, do people donate kits that you can use for buildings on the pizza box, or is it all scratch built?
Well, we have people that will donate buildings, and we also send them online to print paper buildings.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right. We've got about a minute and a half, 2 minutes left. Any last thoughts from anybody?
I would just encourage people that it's not impossible to start working with families. And we're all here to help. You can call any of us. And maybe we should take this minute to talk about the future of the TRAX organization that the 3 of us are involved in. It's teaching resources, activities, and curriculum for kids in STEAM. It does mean something. It's capital letters TRAX.
And
And
the
it is
pizza
a
box,
working group right now, and hopefully we'll get a web page up this year soon that has resources, all of our contact numbers, and the programs that we use. And so maybe it can be a place where people can go to this website and look and ask us questions about things that you might want to use.
and this will be presented at the National too. We'll have program.
So if you
Great.
come to the NMRA's National Convention, we're going to have clinics about TRAX. So
Great. And I assume it'll be we'll make a plug for the NMRA interchange, that maybe we'll have a page there where we can talk about it some more.
I think we probably will.
Okay, good. Well, thank you very much, all of you,
Thank
for joining us, and we'll look forward to seeing you again at maybe at Springfield next year. Who knows? Okay, so now we're going to move ahead here. The next thing that we have is a very short little clinic or tip from Bruce Robinson of the Hub Division called How to Build a Covered Bridge.
We're going to talk about tips and tricks that I used on how to build a covered bridge. This is over a 2-year time frame. If you notice, I don't work very fast. So you'd think, what am I going to do today? Followed by, I know, I'll build a covered bridge, but I don't need a covered bridge for the layout. Gloria wants to visit all 54 covered bridges in New Hampshire. Choose a bridge in Vermont. See article in the back issue of Moderata magazine of a modeler's beautiful covered bridge on his layout, where he gives the name of the prototype bridge. You look up the bridge online. This bridge is located in Vermont. So you drive 3 hours north from southern New Hampshire to northeastern Vermont, where you locate the bridge in Walcott, Vermont. Take a zillion photos and get chased by a very irate wild turkey because you stomped through the high grass where she was nesting. Do drawings. See slide number 5. Drive an hour south to Massachusetts to hobby shop to buy a lot of strip wood. A lot of strip wood. Make a second trip to Vermont to take additional photos. Now the pursuit begins. This is the quarry. This is the Fisher Covered Bridge located in Walcott, Vermont. No, this is a hybrid bridge with a steel support under the track. The wooden portion has no bottom and has no contact with the steel support structure. This is the placard that the state of Vermont put up to give you a little background on the bridge. This is the Fisher Bridge in Walcott, Vermont. This bridge spanning the Lamoille Valley on the St. Johnsbury and Lamoille County Railroad is the last railroad covered bridge still in regular use in Vermont, and one of the very few left in the United States. Built in 1908, it is the only one remaining with a full-length cupola, which provided a smoke escape. In 1968, the bridge was scheduled for destruction to make way for a new steel span. It was saved by placing heavy steel beams underneath. This preservation was achieved with state funds and with generous private donations raised by the Multnomah County Development Council. Okay, we have the inspiration, so let's get started building the covered bridge. The build will be divided into two parts. The first part is the steel understructure, and the second part is the wooden covered bridge itself. Here are a couple of tricks and tips that I used. Maybe I can submit this as two structures for merit judging. You need drawings to begin construction. First, you spend many hours at the drafting table. Then you find plans that were published in the November 1968 Model Railroader. You notice this is true to my form. I build the drawings and then I find published drawings. It's consistent in what I do. Okay, the Fisher Bridge is a hybrid structure, so the steel structures, bridge abutments, rail, were all built first. The left span is a micro-engineering 50-foot girder bridge that has been modified a little bit, and the right span are 50-foot long I-beams. The total length of the bridge is 104 feet. Tie plates were put down, garden running rails are spiked in place, and scenery is added. Part one is done. Okay, here's the part that we're going to talk about for making tips and tricks. The key to building the side trusses is to build a jig. All that time spent on the drafting table is used to transfer the angles and the spacings to a styrene jig. Because this bridge is a double town truss, you need to assemble 8 trusses, 4 per side, and hence the jig. That makes that very simple to do. Add scribe siding and you're almost done. Now comes the next problem. The bridge has no bottom. So how do you assemble this thing? The next tip trick, you build another jig. This one is to hold the sides rigidly in position so the top trusses can be installed. After the top trusses are in place, the ends can be installed. Now you have a rigid structure to work on as the roof is added. The end pieces are glued to the center line of the jig. Note the width of the ends are sized to the NMRA clearance gauge. The sides are fitted into the jig to align them fore and aft and centered. The buttress pieces will be glued to the jig bottom to capture everything and hold the sides in place. Note the recessed cuts to avoid the flare on the bottom of the sides. The 2 end cross pieces have been positioned over the previously installed knees attached to the inside of the sides. The bridge top trusses have been installed and the jig cutaway having done its job. This assembly is now rigid enough to start building the roof and cholesterol assemblies. With the sides and top trusses glued together, fitting the novelty siding ends can now begin. These are the tricks and the tips that I used. 1, you break the project down into smaller, easy to handle pieces. You build jigs. The time spent will be more than offset by making the project go smoother and less stressful. Research the prototype to acquire as much information as possible. Photos and drawings are very important in this process. And finally, watch out for those aggressive Vermont wild turkeys that do not like people from New Hampshire.
So thank you, Bruce. And I'm told that if you want to see the rest of the clinic, Bruce is doing it again at the Hub Division Spring Training. It will be a little longer than it was here for us. This just kind of gives you a taste of it, I guess. Now it's time for a layout tour. Tonight's featured layout is the Ogdensburg and Norwood Railroadway Company of Jim Height. The O&N has a dedicated crew that meets weekly to build, maintain, and operate the layout. And it's been together for more than 20 years doing that. I've been privileged to be a member of that group in recent years. Jim has been an active member of the CNY division. He's been very heavily involved in the NER and the NMRA over this past 20, 25 years or so. This show will be in two parts. So you'll see the first of it now and the last section of it at 10 o'clock. So don't go to bed, stay up and catch the whole thing. So here's part one of the O&M.
Hi everyone, I'm Jim Height, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Ogdensburg and Norwood, a layout based upon my family experience of operating a real railroad of that name back when I was a kid in high school. So the layout is an HO scale. It's a large double-deck layout, and the main line extends over 400 feet. It takes 20 real minutes to run from point to point at a prototypical speed. But we've been building this layout now for the better part of 30 years, and I have a dedicated group of friends that come down every Tuesday night. Most of it is completed. We have JMRI, computer access, Digitrax control, and the layout is not completed. There's still some scenery work being done on it, and you'll probably see it along the way, but I couldn't be more pleased with what we have here and the friends that I have working on it. So I'm glad you're here. Let's take a ride on the O&M. I'm thankful that Ed is here taking the time Saturday morning to video this and so we can visit with you. So if you're ready to go, how about a little bit of the background of the Ogdensburg and Norwood, which was a real railroad operated by my family when I was a kid in high school, 1967 to 1972. And it was the westernmost 25 miles of the Rutland. So the Rutland Railroad, as you may be aware, of course, ran across Vermont, came up across the very tip of upstate New York, Rouse's Point, and then ran west across the roof of the state to Norwood. And the reason for that was they had the Great Western interchange with the New York Central back in the day. And the New York Central owned the Rutland during the period of World War I, so it worked out for both of them. But in any event, the railroad was really built back in the 1840s to go to Ogdensburg, because Ogdensburg, for the Northeast, was the great port of call for all railroad construction, wanting to get to the navigable waters of the Great Lakes. And Ogdensburg was the furthest east that could happen before the construction of the St. Lawrence Seaway. So all the railroads, all through New York State, who had any visions of having any kind of connection with the Great Lakes, including the Lehigh Valley. Lehigh Valley ran up right through Camden, and they intended to go to Ogdensburg. But the Northern Railroad came all the way to Ogdensburg, and there we go. So in any event, the Rutland goes out of business in 1963 due to a labor strike. And at that time, they elected to tear up all the track from Norwood going east across New York. But they left the 25 miles between Ogdensburg and Norwood, because by the time we were up there, the Ogdensburg Port Authority had gone into effect rail service at the port. So the interchange with our short line railroad was at that time with the Penn Central at Norwood on the Montreal Secondary, which still today runs from Syracuse all the way up through the North Country. So we actually had the railroad from Ogdensburg to Norwood. But what I elected to do was to backdate and expand the layout. My family roots are with the New York, Ontario and Western, and I'm a fourth generation railroader with a lot of deep history, personal history in the railroad. So I wanted to have a system which combined both the influences of the O&W, a class line road going through the Catskills, through the mountains, as a bridge line, and I wanted to do that with the O&N. So what I did is I backdated my model to 1948 to be a Class 1 bridge line connecting Canada, the Canadian Pacific, with a car ferry at Ogdensburg across the St. Lawrence, serving New England. This bridge line, and which was similar to and prototype to the Central Vermont, the CV, which did exactly the same thing with the Canadian National, being a bridge line into New England. So the whole concept is to move traffic between southern New England and Canada. So this line here is all fictional. And what we've modeled here is essentially the northern division, which is from Ogdensburg down here to Northville on the Great Sacandaga Reservoir, the Great Sacandaga Lake. The southern division goes down through the Capital District and ends at Pittsfield, Massachusetts, where we interchange with New Haven. So there are all these interchanges along the way with the Rutland, again, 1948, the Rutland's still in business. So we have a serious interchange with the Rutland at Norwood, taking care of the east traffic. We also have interchange with the NERx Central at Norwood and at Potsdam, which are designated right here. And then we have a branch line that comes down into Utica, our own branch line. And Utica in the 1940s was the great classification area of the NERx Central in the 40s, not Syracuse, but Utica. And they interchanged there with the Lackawanna going down to Binghamton, and the O&W had a line that went into Utica, so we interchanged with the O&W as well, which of course serves the northern part of the Catskills for us. And then continuing further on the main line to Mechanicville, you have the interchange with the Boston and Maine, which is an essential interchange even today, and the D&H going north-south through the Albany-Troy area, and then down into Pittsfield and the New Haven. So that's the railroad, and that's the concept that we have. We have 5 different staging areas on this layout where it allows for interchange or off the railroad traffic. And over the years that we've had this layout, we've developed an operating schedule that incorporates all of that. So none of these towns on the Northern Division are modeled authentically to the prototype. What they are is they're placed on the layout geographically as they're supposed to in relation to how they line up theoretically on the map. So if you see scenes of different towns that you know, and you say, wait a minute, that doesn't look like it. Well, you're right, it doesn't. It's not intended to. And we'll talk about that as we go along. So that's the overview. Okay, so now we're at the Southern Division, and again, it's the same thing as the Northern down below. Here's the staging elevators for it. Again, 3 different platforms, 3 tracks each, so 9 total tracks. Again, on a separate elevator through the separate controls down here, which you've already seen in detail. Everything leaves on these approach tracks on the Southern Division and then goes out of sight behind me to reappear on the causeway over the Great Sacandaga. Now, talking about Ogdensburg, maybe I have a better turn. So Canada, and there was, by the way, there was a car ferry across the St. Lawrence at Ogdensburg, but it was not operated by the Rutland, it was operated by the NERx Central. And when we first moved there, it was still operating, connecting with the Canadian Pacific at Prescott, Ontario, across the St. Lawrence, with the NERx Central then at Ogdensburg, and later the Penn Central. But that the dock in Ogdensburg mysteriously burned in the late 60s, so it ended that operation. But in any event, because of that reality on a different railroad, I introduced that concept into the operation of this railroad. So here is the harbor area of St. Lawrence, and in the distance, maybe you can see what we're representing as Canada in the distance across the water. And then all of a sudden the trains appear off of a staging yard which is out of sight and behind the backside of the marine terminal, and come out here in the industrial area of Ogdensburg. Now again, not all of this is fictional. None of this actually existed, with the exception of the grain elevator, which is in the very deep corner down here at Ogdensburg, which you may or may not be able to see. Ed may pick that up later. We did have a grain elevator just like that on the railroad, which was not in the late 60s. The ore dock is fictional. However, iron ore was commercially mined in the Adirondacks up through the 1950s. So I decided just to introduce that as another option for operation. We've yet to complete the bridge connecting it, but we'll get some close-ups later of the approach tracks to the ore dock as opposed to the tracks down on the river level serving the community. And anyway, that's Ogdensburg in terms of its industrial section. We're looking at downtown Ogdensburg, again, all fictional, none of it's real, sort of. First of all, here is the Walthers Ford headquarters building, and we use it for the headquarters and the station at Ogdensburg and the railroad headquarters. And the plan is, of course, to build in the passenger platforms underneath the station. Hopefully we'll get to that relatively soon. But all of the buildings in Ogdensburg that are lighted have sockets, one form or another. And you can see the socket there. When I said none of these are authentic, that's not quite true. What I tried to do in all these communities is to do the research for historically the real businesses and industries that could have served the line, or the line could have served them. So here is MSOL's department store across the street from the headquarters and station, and that is lighted up and it's detailed inside. And I'll tell you what, I had to do the clothing racks inside with cardboard, with paper trousers and dresses that I cut out myself, and that was a lot of fun. But I don't know, I think I'm the only one who knows it's there, but there are people in there shopping and whatnot with the MSOLs. Charlie Albee built and detailed Phillips Diner, which is up here on the corner, a real business that Maribeth and I have frequented over the years and goes back many decades in Ogdensburg. And some of the other buildings is the same. So that's the down to go back into the industrial, which I'm still working on, you can tell. We are still working on. And one thing that's been very helpful is this product, which is no longer available, from King Mill Enterprises, these HO scale paper buildings. We cut them out, glued them onto cardstock or foam core, either one, cut out the windows, and found the Tichy matching windows for the size of the holes. And one of the great things about Tichy is they have that kind of detailed dimension in their doors and their window castings. So Don Andrews is the one who built this building here, and it's lighted from behind. But again, being basically a backdrop building, it's not intended to be highly detailed, but a lot of these buildings along the back of the backdrop, hiding the elevated approach to the ore dock, are King Mill Enterprises cardboard fascia pieces that we put onto cardstock. Now, again, we're still working in this area, and I'm very happy the way that it's coming. It's a slow process, but it's coming. A large part of the traffic on the Ogdensburg and Norwood is coal traffic to Canada. So this is an empty coal train heading south out of Ogdensburg back to it interchanges with the coal producing connecting lines down in Pennsylvania. we're looking at the transition from the elevators to the rest of the layout. The upper deck has this spline lattice with homosote and homa bed construction, which is suspended from the suspended ceiling. And I wanted to show this to give you an idea of how sturdy this is, and the fact that it was the wisdom with me having no hair to protect my scalp by putting on this foam on the edge. And I couldn't be more pleased. It was a two-part article in 2 issues of 1970 model railroader that introduced spline lattice, and I've loved it. Other layouts in the area have used it as well. The bottom level has this swing bridge, allowing access to the power systems and also the lighting area. And the swing bridge fits right in here. And so it has limit switches cut off, which just kills the power on either approach, so you don't have a DCC locomotive going onto the floor. And that's the reason for this red LED to say that the system is open. I'm closing it. It closes the switches, closes the circuit, so now it's safe to run over the layout. The next town out of Ogdensburg going south is Lisbon. And Lisbon is the town where wife Maribeth Seaman and I both went to high school. We're high school classmates 50 years ago. Lisbon is, you can see, is still under construction, and it's the only part of the layout that has its track pattern almost authentic to the real track pattern in real Lisbon. So we're still working on that. I do want to share quickly that Maribeth was the only person that's still alive that has ridden in the caboose with me on the Ogdensburg Norwood all those years ago, 50 years ago. On the lower level, heading south out of Lisbon, we come to Madrid. The rest of the world pronounces it Madrid, but up in the North Country, they pronounce it Madrid. So Madrid is still under construction, still being developed, and it's somehow the Waddington Condensed Milk Company, which will be a massive scratch-built industry along the line, which actually existed in Madrid. So that's just a run through with a passing siding, and it doesn't do much else but just be another stop on the real Ogdensburg and Norwood. And then over here is Norwood. Norwood is just about finished in terms of its construction and detailing. There's a little bit more to do on the real fine detailing, but operationally it is concluded. This is the interchange with both the NERx Central and the Rutland. The Rutland staging is actually behind these structures here. And to be honest, I was kind of short-sighted in the design of the layout and had a real struggle to figure out how am I going to put staging into this layout that's already built. So what we did is we added just 2 tracks, which are hidden by these structures along here, being the Rutland, coming out of Vermont. And all of a sudden, it appears down here. Now, I'm hoping that you can follow me visually down here. These buildings in the front were designed and placed specifically to hide the fact that a train is coming out of buildings behind it. You don't want to see this hole on the end of buildings, or at least I didn't. So these are actually view blocks, which hide the eye from seeing the train coming all of a sudden into view. And Ed O'Rourke is the one who built these for me on my specifications. I'm very thankful for his work. So the Rutland comes in here, and this is the interchange track with the Rutland. Our main line is here, and in the back, that is the NERx Central main line, or the Central Secondary from Syracuse all the way to Montreal, going through Norwood, which it actually does. The next town south of Norwood is Potsdam, and Potsdam is it's a college town in reality, but I'm turning it into a more of an industrial location. It's still under construction and development with a yard which handles the interchange with the NERx Central, this is the spot on the layout where the real New York Central interchange occurs on the layout with the O&N. Excuse me. So when you get down here further, you'll see that there is a 3-story structure being built, which is a union station between the O&N and the New York Central. And then hopefully the day will come when the Central will come out on an elevated bridge over Stam, and I envision it's going to be a really extraordinary scene. Excuse me. On my right, coming out of Potsdam, the grade actually starts going into the Adirondacks. And right here at the base is where things begin to happen. And it's a steady uphill grind through Hanawa Falls, all the way up through Colton, which we'll see later, into this upper level we'll talk about in a bit. Excuse me. The vision is to have pusher service by steam locomotives, starting at Potsdam and ending up here at Blue Mountain Lake on the upper level, which we'll talk about shortly. Hanawa Falls is significant in so far as, again, this whole thing is fictional, but deep in my personal family history, down in the Catskills of the O&W, is Liberty and Liberty Falls, which was renamed as Ferndale after my grandmother. My great-grandfather was the station agent at Liberty Falls, and he was told by the railroad to change the name of the town. So he told my grandmother when she was a little girl, if you're not a good little girl, I'm going to name this town after you. And that's exactly what he did. So today it's Ferndale, and you drive on 17, which is what, Interstate 86, and the next exit below Liberty is Ferndale, named after my grandmother. So the trestle over Ferndale was very similar to the trestle that's here in Hanawa Falls. And the station, which is in Hanawa Falls, is not similar to the one that was in Ferndale, but it's situated in the right place compared to this trestle, which Ferndale Station, where my great-grandfather was, in relation to the Ferndale trestle. So, it 3 weeks of Tuesday nights to install this trestle. And I modified this from microengineering kits before they made the commercially available extension to the towers. I did all that myself upstairs, brought it down in sections, and this whole story about how we did this with a bucket brigade of little cups of plaster from the main room into here by a bunch of guys pouring plaster to secure the footings for this trestle. Is one of the great times we had down here. When I first built this layout, we were using small handheld walkie-talkies to talk to the dispatcher, but as the time is 1948, we elected to make the change to make it prototypical, which is using phones. So the way it works is station agents, not the locomotive operators, but agents at the stations, call into the dispatcher to place the passing of the trains so they can be marked OS or on sheet. And that's what these phones at different locations do. So this phone handles both Colton and Tupper, which we'll talk about shortly. On the lower level, after we've left Hanawa Falls and going over the trestle, again heading south on the railroad, we're coming into Colton. And Colton is just a stop on the railroad, serving different industries in the town. But the nice thing about it is because the basement wall is set in, it allows us to do the more detailed modeling in the community, including some industries. A particularly nice part of Colton is the milk trains. And when we switch the milk trains, right here is the creamery. And it's enough for the milk trains in the evening, delivering the empties up from New York City into the creamery. And of course, first thing in the morning, taking the loads out and heading them to New York. And there's some good switching on those trains, those local trains. So that's Colton. Obviously, this is the helix connecting both levels of the layout. The helix is the oldest part of the layout, having been built for a layout that I was building previously in another town. Bill Swain, a retired Air Force man at Griffiths, was the line in the, I know, it's the oldest, the first threaded rod helix in existence. I love it because the way you can finally adjust the different towers to get the consistent grade throughout the so become in wood, and it's not subject to humidity variations down here in the basement.
Okay. So we hope you enjoyed that that first section on the O&N. The next section will be at 10 o'clock, so stick around. I want to remind you again that this year the NERx is sponsored by Mini Prints, Interaction Hobbies, and Micromark. Micromark is offering a 20% discount during the NERx convention. Just enter the promotion code WAYBILLS23 when placing your order during the event. Mini Prints and Interaction Hobbies are both holding drawings for two $50 gift vouchers. That's 4 vouchers altogether. Look for the links to that in the Facebook and the YouTube chats, and we'll get that information to you for how to get yourself into the drawing. Drawing will be held at 8:45 Eastern Time on Thursday. Watch and see if you win. And now, Mike Pyzik is going to show us a new use for an old microbrush. Thank you, Mike, and thanks to all of you for joining us on NERx 2023. Now, in the studio with me is John Volacevic. John is going to be our next clinician, and I'm particularly interested in this because I'm getting ready to build a new small layout, and I'm going to be interested to see what John has to offer us. Designing operations on a small layout and how operations can guide your layout design. John has been modeling since the late 1980s and is currently building a layout of the Raquette Lake Railway. Like many of us, his space is limited, so he designed something that can offer operations in a small space. John is a member of the Hudson Berkshire Division. And a reminder once again, if you have questions for John, put them in the chat and we'll try and answer them after the clinic. So here we go. We'll roll the clinic.
Designing operations on a small layout and how operations can guide your layout design is the subject of my clinic tonight. When I first set out to build the first permanent N-scale layout that I'd ever done, I had done lots of research leading up to it. That research included filling binders full of information and about the railroad I was going to model, and electronic files of photos and maps. Most important to me was that in my design process, I knew I wanted operating sessions. I had the opportunity to operate on quite a few layouts using a couple different systems, so I had the chance to really study each system. My desire to have a layout for operation pushed my design process even more than my prototype. So I'm the guy who wants a job off in the corner. I don't want to have to keep getting through the radio chatter to ask the dispatcher for permission to do my moves. I don't like to be jostled. I'm actually a short guy. I don't really like to be crowded by other operators. So I wanted to make sure my operators had their own areas and wouldn't be clustered together. And I gave it some thought to leave them room to do their work where they weren't going to be bumping into each other. I don't like a whole lot of time constraints or feel like I'm under pressure. I gotta go. You often feel like that when you go to a layout that you're not used to. So while my layout has jobs that have challenge, they're very manageable. I often have people who are not model railroaders come operate, and nobody's really stressed out. Like I said, I often have beginners or non-operators or just random people, including my family in. And I don't want anybody to feel lost. Sometimes I go to layouts and they've got hidden trackage and the train goes in this tunnel and out that tunnel, back and forth. You can't ever keep track of where you're going. So I really wanted to make it a very simplistic, easy to follow layout. There is hidden trackage, but it's nothing that an operator generally has to worry about. So this is layout diagram. The colors are not super, and this was kind of early in the process, but you can see by the human figures, people are off in corners and they're not on top of each other. There's a sawmill complex with a yard that is a really busy spot on the layout. There's a small division yard. There's a Racket Lake itself was on a return loop in real life. I have Racket Lake in a return loop on my layout, and there's a staging yard. The room is a converted woodshed that was basically built out of scrap lumber and had a dirt floor, and I hung a new floor and sheetrocked it and insulated it, and it's a very comfortable room now. It's about 7 by 21 feet roughly is the space of the layout. Single deck. So operation philosophies that drove my design. My layout is designed to run with or without a dispatcher, depending on if we have enough people. The goal is to have a layout that can operate with anywhere up to 5 to 9 operators, which gets really tight, but we can do it. But we can also get by with 3 or 4 operators. And I wanted a system that was modular in its operation based on the number of people helping and the experience level. I can make it more complicated if I have experienced operators, and I can make it simpler for people who don't really have a whole lot of experience. Like I said, I wanted to have my operators to be able to operate in an area of their own without a lot of traveling on the layout. Passing past people, is really difficult when you're trying to operate, and it's uncomfortable. I wanted a challenge for experienced operators. So a couple of my jobs, you got to hustle, you got to know what you're doing. But I wanted it to be manageable if all I had was beginners or visitors come in. And I wanted it to be low key. No one really holds up another operator if you're running behind. All the work that the locals are doing is for the next operating session. So nobody has to feel like, oh, I'm running behind, or I don't have yard operators who are getting irritated because their trains aren't coming in. Everybody's doing their work of the day and they're preparing for the next session. So nobody's getting stressed if they don't get it done. And the beauty of that also is if we don't get a job done, I can just finish it up between sessions and it didn't mess up the whole entire layout. So I looked at a lot of operating systems, and around here in the Capital District, a lot of guys use 3x5 cards with a paper clip, and you move it around and you write with a pencil where your car movements are. I've operated in New England, where one of the layouts that I really like, he just swaps light cars, wood chip cars for wood chip cars and back and forth. Some systems I use switch lists, and switch lists, I like switch lists because of they can kind of direct how you're working your train. It's still my second choice of how to do a system here on this layout. But I also use car cards and waybills, and I always came back to car cards and waybills. There's just something about handling the cards. It's what before I knew what operating was, I knew that that was operating. And so I've always gone back to that. So with car cards and waybills, it's the tactile effect of handling the paperwork while running the train, keeping it in order, lining them up, that appealed to me. I also like the way that it eliminates by using 4 position cards set up in staging time. I have friends, I've been to their layouts and other people's layouts where they have to spend hours restaging between sessions. And I wanted to avoid that as much as possible. I wanted this layout to just run. So I wanted a system that basically just ran continuously and didn't need much between sessions. And it drove the design of my staging yard more than anything, where it symbolizes 2 geographic terminuses of the Adirondack division of the New York Central. It's Tupper Lake-ish and it's Utica. But really it's a north destination and it's a south destination. The car cards and waybills, I do have switch lists. We have not used them a lot to begin with, but they lend themselves well to doing switch lists. And my thought is if I start having operators who are moving too fast, we can go to switch lists to slow it down, slow the paperwork down. That has not so far been the problem, although I don't have a regular operating crew. So we'll see how that goes in the future. So when I set up my operation plans, I wanted to make sure as soon as I got running, it was just going to continue to run with little or no maintenance and no extensive setup time. I can flip this layout. Usually while everybody is kind of BSing at the end of the session, I'll do over half of the work. It takes me about 15 minutes to a half an hour to be ready for the next session. The layout's small. I wanted to make sure my traffic was balanced as much as possible. I wanted to make sure the work was same session to session. So what I ended up with is the 4 positions of the waybills are 4 shifts. So for each session, all cards will be on the same number. And this makes it easy for the operators or me to find mistakes. I announce what number we are on at the beginning of each session. That way, if a card shows up and it doesn't have the right number, we already know that it got messed up along the way. And I was afraid that if the cars were random, like you find on a much larger layout, and they're all on different numbers, that my already small jobs could end up with either no work or just overloaded with work. And so by using the positions on the cards, I used a spreadsheet to control how much traffic was going to my sidings. The randomization, I wanted to make sure there was randomization. I didn't want somebody to come in and go, okay, it's operating 2, and that boxcar goes to that side, and now they're not looking at the paper. They're not in the moment. They're not paying attention. Because it runs in 4 sessions, it's not just the car goes to the yard and a siding and back to the yard and the siding. It goes from the yard to the siding to the yard to staging to the yard to siding. And so, again, we don't operate enough that people are memorizing moves. So I use a couple different things. The card on the left has a red dot in the upper corner. That's an overhead car. I'll discuss that farther. The car in the middle or on the right-hand side, that card has a red dot on the waybill. The locations on the layout are color-coded. I did not invent this. A bunch of guys in the Boston area use color coding. Everything I do is from what I learned from other people. But at a glance, you can tell where a card is. And I have colored clips on clipboards that are the same color. I try to make it so nobody's getting confused about what they're doing. The overhead cars on the left, they're to fill out the trains leaving staging running through the Adirondack Division to the junction with the Racket Lake Railway. They are just filler to keep 10-car minimums running through the layout and to fill out my locals. If a local has 6 cars and it needs 4 more, I use these overhead cars. The waybills are also color coded. Anything that's going out on the layout, not just passing through staging, has a colored location to where it's going. The light green is the sawmill and the dark green is the yard at the sawmill. Other than that, green is the sawmill yard, red is the Adirondack Division, yellow is Racket Lake, blue is the logging camp. So you can keep looking and instantly knowing right where I'm supposed to be. And this has the different positions. 1 and 2 was on the first sheet, 3 and 4 on the other sheet. I printed them out on cardstock. I cut them out. This was a template that I found that was for business cards. And business cards are set up so that you can do text kind of upside down. So that's what I used. I got it off of, I think it was an old operations forum on the internet. These are the other car cards for destinations on the layout. They don't have the red dot in the upper left corner. They just fold up. That's pretty typical, pretty standard car cards and waybills. So the type of trains and pre-session setup, every train departing staging has to have 10 cars and a caboose. We use small steamers in N scale, so train lengths are important. We can't go over 10 cars plus a caboose. On the freight side, there are 3 classes of trains coming out of staging. A milk train, in my imagination, it is a milk train coming south out of Vermont that's been detoured across the Adirondack Division because of a problem on the Rutland. It just runs through. It's an icebreaker, so people can kind of see how it travels through the staging and through the Adirondack Division. It just runs north and southbound. We don't really switch it out. Through trains, there's 2 through trains. They have 10 overhead cars. We place 10 cards and waybills randomly drawn into a slot for each of the through trains, and they're clipped. The cars are scattered on purpose through the staging yard. And there are waybills for north, south, depending on if it's going north or south. So there's a northbound through, there's a southbound through. Local trains are made of cars destined for online industries or yards and have that colored bar across the top. Like I said, the color corresponds to its destination. So I then use overhead cars to fill the rest of that train. So again, if there's only 6 cars going to online industries, I need 4 overhead cars. When it gets to the junction with the Racket Lake, those overhead cars continue on up the line, usually taking cars that came off the Racket Lake, and then it continues. It's just a way to maintain 10-car trains. The one bit of setup that I do between sessions is I make sure that the staging yard and the sawmill yard are jumbled up and shuffled. I don't want anything pre-staged. I don't want anything pre-blocked, because that's part of the work and it's part of the workflow. I'll explain that when I get to the staging yard. So again, these are overhead car waybills, the solid circle for northbound, an open circle for southbound. I just draw them out of a pile at the end of the night. After the end of the session, I pull all those cards, I pull all the waybills, and then I reload them all, and it automatically randomizes the staging yard. And then I make up 10 for the throughs and whatever I have to do. And it's just a way of always making sure that the trains are different. Again, it's 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4. It's just both sides of the car cards before I printed them out. These are the overhead cars with red dots up in the upper corners. Again, if it's a stack of cards, like an operator will ask me a question, where's this card go? I can look at it and go, well, that card doesn't belong out on the Racket Lake. That's supposed to be on the Adirondack Division. And you can tell right at a glance. I also have a sheet up in the train room that has the color codes and things like that. So the passenger trains consist of a sleeper train and a coach train. They basically cycle through the Adirondack division during the session. They do some work and they stop at Carter Station, which is where the Racket Lake Railway came into the Adirondack division. Passenger cars are picked up and dropped off at Carter to go out on the Racket Lake Railway. In real life, they used to take sleeper cars and drop them. You could get on a sleeper in Grand Central, and then they would drop off the sleepers at Carter and take the sleepers into Eagle Bay and into Racket, and then you'd wake up in the morning and you're ready to go to your great camp. So we simulate some of that traffic. There's some local train service in addition. There's a coach train that runs from Racket Lake. It's just a local passenger. They ran local passenger even when there wasn't tourists. People had to get places. The Racket Lake Railway was 25 miles in the middle of the Adirondack. So that was the way in and out of town. There's also a mixed train that runs from the logging camp, Camp 53, and it runs to Carter. There's a Racket Lake local to handle all the freight work at Racket. And the logging trains run up the logging line empty and back down loaded. They are often interchanged at a division yard called Eagle Bay. I don't use paperwork for the passenger trains. I do use Form 19s as a way to instruct the operators on what their job is, what they're working on. There's been some discussion whether Form 19 was the correct designation that I should have used. But at this point, I'm going to keep with it because I've printed them all out and I use them for the instructions so people can quickly refer back, oh, I'm supposed to go from this point to that point. So the basics are there's 4 freight jobs on the layout, and a couple of them can be run with 2 operators. There's a main yard job online. It's the Thompson-Dix sawmill, known as TD Yard. It's right off the right of way of the New York Central Adirondack Division, and it's the distribution point for the Racket Lake Railway and the Round Axe logging line. All traffic out. The other yard job is the staging yard operator. This is the job that drives the pace of the layout and the operating session. There's a 3-track coach yard, arrival and departure tracks, and a 4 or 5-track freight yard. In addition, there's a return loop with its own passing siding, an engine track, and a drill track. There are 2 local jobs, one on the Racket Lake Railway and one on the Thompson-Dix logging line, otherwise known as the Round Axe logging line. If time and operator strength allows, there are also 2 log jobs on the logging line and passenger work on the Racket Lake Railway. Frankly, we are usually busy enough for 2.5, 3 hours that some of that stuff doesn't get run. So in detail, the Round Axe logging line local starts off the session by gathering up all of the cars to be picked up from the various sidings at the logging camp, plus the combination car, and it heads towards Eagle Bay, which is a division yard. Any log cars that are at the logging camp stay there. Train stops along the way at the logging landings to drop off loggers for their workday. It was quickly discovered in our first session that you cannot start the session by bringing the setouts up from Eagle Bay and do your work because there's not enough room in the camp to do your switching of both your pickups and your setouts. Justify why we're running downhill back to the yard with the coach. By running the train this way, it also gave the Thompson-Dix sawmill operator time to pull out the cars for 2 locals. The first session, everything came to a stop because the yard operator was still trying to get all the cars that had to go out and people were standing around. That's another pet peeve of mine. I do not like traveling to go operate a layout and then have to stand around. The job traverses the entire logging line, and majority of its work is tucked away at the end of the logging line at Camp 53. Camp 53 is called Camp 53 because it's 53 inches off the ground. Generally, the train drops its pickups and picks up its setouts from Eagle Bay Yard, which is, like I said, it's a little division yard. The only time it passes through Thompson-Dix Yard is to drop off and pick up its passenger car. This is all outlined in the Form 19. The last move of the day is to return to the Camp 53 yard with just the passenger car, bringing the loggers from the logging landing back to the bunkhouse. If time permits, after the work is done, logging cars are picked up at the landings and brought back to Eagle Bay, and empties are placed at the logging landings. Some little weird quirks. A loaded log car is in the yard at Camp 53. It is not picked up with the rest of the pickups, and the Form 19 says that. Often operators ignore that note and then have to run that log car back. The yard's very tight and the room is limited, so it takes time to work through the moves. The majority of the work is in the camp yard, and the operator is out of the way generally from other operators. There is some coordination with the operator Eagle Bay, Switchback, and the Thompson-Dix Yard operator, because you can't get two middle-aged men down in the same point of my layout. Racket Lake Local starts off by picking up its passenger car from the station and heading down to Carter and the sawmill, and stopping on stops all the way on its way, which is Uncas Station and Eagle Bay. It's a local train that brings riders from the more remote Racket Lake and other stops to the rest of the Adirondack Division at Carter. The coach is dropped off at Carter Station, and the engine reports to the yard. The operator will hand off all the setouts for the logging line local and the Racket Lake local. Those cars will run as a local to the Eagle Bay Yard and be sorted out by the Racket Lake local. He's going to take his cars and put them on one siding, and he's going to put the cars for the Roundax logging line on the other siding. Again, it speeds up the sawmill because that work can be just dumped out and taken care of in a different location, because the sawmill operator is busy all day in his yard. The Racket Lake job sometimes gets done quickly. He ends up being the sawmill yard assistant also, and as the Carter station agent. Carter is an interesting place on my layout. It can be a ghost town, and then it can be an absolute traffic jam, and then back to a ghost town before you can even figure out what's going on. Last move for the Racket Lake local is back to the station, making all of the stops in reverse on its way back up. So some of the quirks for this, the majority of the work is in the return loop that makes up the town of Racket Lake. That puts you out of the way of the staging operator and of the logging camp operator. You're tucked literally inside of a 32-inch diameter circle. There's only one turnout not within your reach. It's controlled by the only tortoise machine on the layout and a PSX AR. There is a button to hit it to flip the switch whichever way you need to go. There is not a runaround. There was not a runaround on the real railroad. They used the loop as a runaround. I've been adding cars to this job because a good operator can do this job too quickly. If you have any operating experience at all, you can whip it off pretty quickly. Because we don't normally run the passenger trains, this job doesn't get a lot of interruption. So again, by working with the yard operator at the sawmill, the local can take some of the initial load off that yard and streamline operations. Before it was added, the Racket Lake local had to wait around for the sawmill operator to dig all the cars out and sort them out. And the operator often handles work around the Eagle Bay Yard during the session as needed, or Carter Station if the staging yard or the sawmill yard are falling behind. So the sawmill operator, this is a very popular job on my layout. You run a sawmill yard and you run basically a division yard or a small yard. There's actually 2 yards. All incoming and outgoing traffic passes through the yard. And the yard operator controls all of the trackage on the branch line, on the Racket Lake Railway. And all that acts as a tower man. It's kind of a lots of hats that you wear. All outgoing cars to the locals need to be pulled from the yard or the sawmill tracks. The first cars out, as I said, are the locals' cars to be sent to Eagle Bay. All cars for the northbound and southbound locals on the Adirondack Division are pulled and blocked on the passing siding in Carter. Coordination is with the train master or the dispatcher or the staging yard operator, depending on how many people we have running. All cars from the northbound, southbound locals on the Adirondack Division are gathered and sorted into the yard. So we're pulling all the cars that go out on the north and southbound locals out on the division, and then anything that comes in off the division gets sorted back into the yard. There's also work all throughout the sawmill, including moving logs to the mills, equipment to the ramps, logs to the scaling yards, logs to the log dump. So there's a lot of work to be done in there. All incoming cars coming back from the local jobs also will need to be sorted. That's usually at the end of the session. So this job is a job I always give to good operators or people who know what they're doing. It has to start right away. It has to be with an operator who knows what they're doing. We will pair somebody who's not experienced with the yard operator if we have to, but we usually just try to pick an experienced operator. There's sorting boxes that are in the order and labeled in the order of the trains going out. Very easy. They're right in order. You just pull the stack of cards. That's the first train, second train, third train, fourth train. There's a schedule and there's tip sheets that break down what you're supposed to do in the yard. The work is steady. The only interruptions are from the locals is when you need to flip the switch on the switchback. There's really not a lot of room for two people, as I said at the end of the lobe of the layout. Like I said, it benefits from having an assistant. There's just a lot going on, especially when the cars being pulled for the outgoing locals are ready and there's trains coming in to Carter, and it can get a little tense. The Racket Lake local often helps out by working Carter Station and some of those other places. Like I said, Carter is an interesting place. It can be fully jammed with cars and then a ghost town and then back again. And it's never the same every session because of having different people of different experience and speed and pacing. So it's really interesting. I stand on an elevated platform often, kind of watching things, and I'm just always fascinated to see what's going on at Carter. It's a crazy place. Staging yard operator, another position, not for somebody who wants to walk around and take a lot of photos and shoot the breeze. This person needs to be on it right off the bat. I give them the first train, the milk train, to go out just so they can get an idea, because the Adirondack Division is a lot of it runs under the layout. I want them to understand. Often I'll have somebody run their trains for them so they can keep switching. But I at least want them to understand how the layout works. Again, sorting boxes are in the order of the trains going out. Nobody has to search. They just grab a stack of cards. This is what I need to pull. The work is steady pretty much through an entire session. This operator controls all traffic in and out of the yard. They have plenty of room to work, even with two operators. We've done that repeatedly, and they have plenty of room to get their work done. There's a lot of work with the first two trains in particular. The first train in particular, the cars are a jumbled mess. So you're searching for cars. Oh, there's one on this track. I got to get it out. That's done purposely for the pacing of the trains going out. But so the first two trains really can take a lot of time to put together. Incoming trains, we often dump on a track on the passing loop, on the return loop. And what I do is I just have them put all the incoming stuff that's coming back on that. That's overhead trains. That's anything that came in from the other yards. And what they'll do is, as they finish the end of the session, they'll fan the cars out through the yard. 1 on 1 track, 2 on 2 track, and they'll just sort them out one at a time and just keep fanning it through. And that helps shuffle the yard up. And like I said, that's the last job for that operator. Often if I have a lot of reset to do, it's because that operator didn't have enough time to resort the cars. And that's something I can do, 2 evenings later, and I can just go out there and sort the cars and jumble them all up, make sure it's not blocked. We do this on purpose for the pacing, but we could pre-block these trains and skip having a staging yard operator full time if I don't have enough people. But luckily I've been able to have enough people that I haven't had to do that. So this has to have a lot of attention to detail. They have to know, is it an overhead car? Is it a car for out on the layout? They have to pay attention to the cars. They have to work right along and communicate with the dispatcher and train master to keep the traffic rolling. It really helps to have somebody run the trains out on the Adirondack division to the division point with the Racket Lake, because it's just too much often for the yard operator to have to stop what they're doing, switching in the yard to run out and run the train. I often do that. I run this layout with JMRI and NCE, and I use phones on JMRI for me. I carry one with me all the time. That way, if I need to jump in, I can just dial in a number and help somebody out. And so I'll often run the trains out of staging through the division point with the Racket Lake and back into staging just to give the yard operator a break. It's important for this operator to pay attention. The north and southbound tracks leaving the yard are labeled. It's important for them to remember which way they're going. The yard is really tight. It just fits the number of cars. So I don't really have enough room to store like specials or any kind of special moves like a wreck train or anything. I don't have enough room in the yard. I've been trying to rack my brain on figure out how to get some more track, because I can't add in anything. If a pace is going too fast, I can't send a wreck train out. So that's something I need to add. So like I said, a balanced flow was really important to me. I wanted to make sure the work was relatively equal every session. I didn't want to have a session where there was only one car going in and one car leaving, and now that operator is done for the night. So what I did is I started a spreadsheet with 4 columns and had the car name, car number, type, and the 4 positions. For every car, I determined where it would be on each position. So if we're going to start with the first 4 cars, car number 1 on position 1, it's a coal car at Racket Lake Coal Dock. At 2, it's at the yard. At 3, it's on a local. 4, it's back in the yard. The second car of the 4 starts out at the yard. Position 2 takes it to the coal dock, back to the yard, southbound local. So I took and made sure that at every one of those positions, there would be a car going to the coal dock. I did that with every siding on the entire layout. Some sidings have multiple cars, but I did it with every siding. That way I always knew how many cars were going to be in the locals, and I knew that there would be work each time. We don't do a lot of holds or set outs or holds of cars for the next session, because again, the number on the car is determining the session. Again, if people are figuring it out, we can swap cards around, but we don't operate enough. And with 4 cars occupying a siding over a period of 4 sessions, nobody remembers, oh yeah, that car's supposed to go over there. So I did a lot of thinking about this, and then how was I going to set up a session? And I read a lot of books, and I never found in a book that said, this is how you start your session. I read a lot of books that said, this is the cards, this is the string line graph, which I still have never mastered, and a bunch of other stuff, but it never said, when you start your session, do this. So what I did is I took all the cars and the cards and the waybills, and I put everything on position 4. Once I got that entirely set up, I rolled all the cards, the waybills over to position 1. Once they were ready to go, we were ready to go. All the cars are ready to go. Again, I think about larger layouts where the cars are all on different numbers. I don't know how, I haven't had a chance to figure out how people keep track of their traffic flow. But again, the layouts are so big, it's not like mine where if they don't have enough cars, there's no work. They have plenty of work. The cars, you can tell where the cars are going by the colored stripe on for their positions. A coal car at the coal dock was placed in position 4. Position 1 says the car is going to the yard. So you know that it's got to go to the yard on the local. The local will also have a set out to replace it on the siding. I also acid tested this layout on its first operating session by basically only using inexperienced operators. I was the only person, I had one other person who had operated. He ran the sawmill yard, but I basically ran this layout with 4 or 5 people who weren't even train guys, didn't even run trains. I wanted them to find the weak spots that experienced operators would have just worked around. I wanted to find the things that dragged it to a halt so I could fix it. There were very few problems. The biggest one, like I said, was at the logging camp. There's not enough room to do your setouts and your pickups at the same time, so I had to break that into 2 moves. That actually helped that job and make it last longer. The other thing was to get the local cars out of the sawmill yard into Eagle Bay yard. And so people would have work right away. Nobody's standing around with nothing to do. So as I said, the sorting boxes in the yards are in the order of the train schedule. So the operators don't have to look up a bunch of stuff. I have schedules up all around the layout, but they just pull the next one, pull the next one. There's sorting shelves in a lot of the bigger yards and the smaller spots so that you can sort out your car cards. I'm trying to get people to refrain from putting car cards in my scenery or in my yard. I still do it, but I try to use sorting shelves. I used piano hinges that fold down from the layout, and they have grooves so you can kind of sort it out. There are tip sheets in each of the yard. I believe all of the switching areas too, that give you suggestions on how to do the work. You can ignore them if you want, but most people use them because they just don't know the layout well enough. There's also a schedule at the staging yard so they can keep track of the trains on track, keep track of the trains on the tracks and pertaining to the order of dispatch departure from the yard. This is important because if you leave it up to the staging yard operator, they'll run all the freight trains and never run a passenger train because they're so focused. So this makes them look through, okay, now the passenger local has to go out. Now the freight local, it gives them a chance to get them in order. Like I said, there's Form 19s. Every train has a detailed set of instructions for all of its moves. When you leave the Racket Lake to do the Racket Lake local, there's a Form 19. When you come back, there's another Form 19 for you on your return trip. I picked up a trip from an operator in Queensbury, an owner operator in Queensbury. He found a typeface called My Old Remington that looks like an old typewriter font. I did the Form 19s in Excel. I did almost everything in Excel. And then I used this old Remington typeface so it looks like somebody typed it up on an old typewriter in a yard tower or whatever. So it kind of gives that authenticity. There's clipboards for every job that are color coded to the yard that you're going or the place that you're going. So if you are doing blue cards, there's blue clips on a mini clipboard just to keep reinforcing that. Switch lists, we have them. We've not used them much. We will use them if operations start really speeding up. It's very interesting. Most sessions run 2 to 3 hours, even with inexperienced operators. I've also had sessions with experienced operators where we didn't get all the work done in over 3 hours. I haven't figured that out yet. In each of the towns and yards, there's these little diagrams. Camp 53 has the sidings. Racket Lake, you can see the return loop. Thompson Dick Sawmill has all the tracks and what they're for because they're specific tasks. And Carter Station has a diagram. So when they are putting the cars out, they'll be picked up by the Adirondack Division. They know where to go. This is an example of a Form 19. As you can see, it's got an old typewriter typeface. I tried to abbreviate them. I got taken to task on one of the operator Facebook pages because my abbreviations weren't right. But I wanted it so people could understand it. And it basically gives your instructions. So this is the tips and tricks for the staging yard. It basically explains what's going on. It gives you an idea what to do. Again, you go to a layout, first time you've ever been there, or maybe you operate once in a while. You have no idea where to start. I find myself getting easily overwhelmed. This is a way to touch back to what I'm supposed to do and follow the instructions through. This is the master schedule for all the trains that run out and what's going on each line. So the two locals are the first two trains. They're doing their work. Milk train runs out. The southbound through, which is just a through train, runs out of staging. The Thompson-Dix yard is doing his work. And so it just is it's a way for the train master, dispatcher, and the staging yard operator to be keeping track of the trains that are going in and out of the layout. Staging instructions. This is his Bible. It talks about the southbound milk, the southbound through, the westbound sleeper, the westbound local. Northbound sleeper, northbound local, northbound through, northbound coach. It tells them what train he's supposed to be or they are supposed to be running next. If they just follow this, they're okay. This is the sawmill's instructions. Again, if they just follow these instructions, they won't gum up the works. So the layout needs a minimum of 5 people to operate well. Like I said, we can do it with 3 or 4. And we can act because none of the big yards are dependent on the cars coming in from the local to do their work to send it out on the rest of the layout. The last operating session, we only had 3 operators, so we skipped the logging line. I had to run the logging line separately and just in an evening. I just did the work to catch up. But it's very modular on how we do it. It runs better with 7 people, with an assistant staging yard master and an assistant yard operator at the sawmill who acts as the station agent and dispatch and also the station agent, and then also a dispatcher. I find as the owner, I'm the train master, I can dispatch, but I get distracted if I have a bunch of people who don't know what they're doing. It's nice to have a dispatcher who's just kind of keeping things going. We use just a panel in JMRI on a computer screen, and he can move the little pills around with the names of the trains and kind of keep track and hands out the paperwork. With 8 to 9 operators, we can have assistants and dispatcher and a floater handling any other train movements. But the room starts to get really crowded. It's only 7 by 21 in 2 small rooms. It gets really crowded. 5 to 7 is kind of the sweet spot for the sessions. Like I said, the dispatcher, we don't always have someone to do it, but when we do, it makes my job easier as a train master to keep the Form 19 straight and to prevent meets, unintentional meets. We don't have a lot of that. There's not enough traffic, but it is still nice to have a dispatcher who's keeping track. The dispatcher also, I have a train sheet. We have not gotten into timetable. That's another layer that I haven't done, but they can track the trains and they can kind of keep track of the session for me to see if there's a problem. These are the sorting boxes at the sawmill. They are in the order of the work that you do. 53 is for the camp, RL is the Racket Lake local. So those blue and yellow cards get pulled first and sent to Eagle Bay, and then he knows to work on the northbound local, then the southbound local. There's also tracked boxes. That work gets done during his session. He'll put the cards in the Thompson-Dix yard or the mill or the ramp or the hardwood mill. There's 2 sawmills in the sawmill yard. There's a hardwood mill and a softwood mill. At the end of the session, I'll take all those cards, flip all the waybills over, and then they end up in the first 4 card boxes again. So he just has to worry about, I put this car at the ramp and put it in the slot. I'll fix it between sessions. And again, like I said, when people are kind of standing around shooting the bull, I'm going, and I'm flipping the cards. And like I said, if they've done it well, it's 15 minutes for me to restage between sessions. So this is the sorting shelf at Thompson Dick Sawmill. In the far left is the hardwood mill. The engine house is in the kind of the front left. The softwood mill, the main building is done. All the platforms need to be done. And then there's the yard. The back couple tracks are for the sawmill and the front couple tracks are for the actual yard. There's a big long passing siding right in the foreground for him to do his work. This is Eagle Bay. There will be, I took photos here. This is the work that did not get done the last session. So those cars needed to go to Camp 53. Everything else was taken care of. What happens when the cars come back from the local, this yard operator will sort stuff back out. He'll put all the Racket Lake cards in the box and he'll put the 53 box cards in the box, and what goes back to the yard. The dock is a hardwood log dock where they would pull hardwood logs off a softwood log float. So there's right in the foreground of Eagle Bay, there's this other spot. So a little bit of work to do in this area besides just setting up trains. So this is Eagle Bay itself. Right there in kind of the right foreground is the hardwood dock. Fourth lake of the Fulton chain is where the white plaster rocks are. Around the post, that blue post will be the Eagle Bay Hotel. It's a very large hotel. There's a couple buildings like section houses and stuff that have to go in. Down below, that is the rest of the Adirondack division. That is the hidden track. You're able to easily see the trains from a lot of places in the layout to make sure that the trains leaving and going to staging are visible. There's no work. You don't really have to do anything. They just go where they need to go, but it is a way to kind of keep an eye. I also, for the passenger trains in particular, but also on the other trains, those engines have sound. I'll often blow the whistle so I can hear them under the layout and make sure they haven't gotten hung up or whatever. This is a staging yard. This is the outgoing card boxes. They are in order of the trains going out. Super, super easy. You just pull what you need to do. Like I said, the milk train just goes out and comes back. There's no work with that. That has a white clip. The other ones are color coded for where they're going and what they're doing. You have plenty of room. This is my workbench here. You have plenty of room to do your work. The tips are clipped onto the fascia. The one small one is actually covering the plug for my NCE programming track, so nobody accidentally plugs into that. But all of your work is done in this yard. It's an L-shaped yard. It's very ergonomic to operate. This is all the out and the in. So when a train is ready to go, they put the outbounds in the outbound box. When the trains come back from doing their work on the layout, they go on the inbounds. This doesn't get touched by most operators. This is where I do my work at the end of the session to take all those car cards, sort them all out, flip the waybills, change the waybills, and do that kind of stuff. But they can get the stack of cards so they don't get confused what's got to leave and what's coming in. This is Camp 53. This is the operator area for Camp 53. This is the highest point on the layout. It's actually up in the top left corner is the logging camp on top of that rock cut. He again has sorting boxes and a fold down sorting shelf. It's a nice spot. You never feel like somebody's going to bump into you. There's plenty of room to get around you. Nobody's stepping on your toes. This is the fold up piano hinge sorting box. Again, everything's labeled with gold lettering where they are going. I've painted the front of the layout Pullman green with finish washers and sheetrock screws to look like rivets, and then I used gold lettering to look like the heavyweight passenger cars. Racket Lake operators area is still under construction. I've actually moved on a little bit since this photo, put in the inside fascia, put in the sorting shelf, but basically, again, you slip into that hole, there's plenty of room. My knees are kind of bad and I'm way chunkier than I should be. I can get easily in and out of that without hurting myself. I designed that hole. If I had made it a little smaller, I could have fit more operation in, but I wanted to make sure people could comfortably get in and comfortably get out. This is Carter Station. This is right in the hallway. You're really out of everybody's way. Those boxes aren't really labeled because you got a lot of stuff going. I do have tags in there, so you can kind of move them around to whatever you need. The very front track, right above the boxes, is where we put all the outgoing stuff. It's separated from each other, but this is where this person does the switching. They take the cars coming off the inbound locals and then send the cars that are going to continue on out. They do all their work in this area. The station is kind of left center. There was an oil track and a water tank here. Even after the Racket Lake was removed, they had a water tank here. This was a kind of a servicing point on the railroad. This, when I first rode the Adirondack Scenic Railroad, this was as far north as they went, was to here, and then they would back out again. You can see this area still on the Adirondack Railroad. The trackage for the Racket Lake is all gone. There was truly a Y always here. My Y is not quite right. The northbound side never tied into the Adirondack Division main line. It kind of swept out and then passed back down. The Y was not part of the top of the Y was not part of the Adirondack Division. I didn't have enough room to pull all of that out. This is most of the layout is on shelves. This is the only part that's on its own stand, and I lagged it to the floor. I braced it. I lagged it some more. It has withheld some pretty hard bumps from operators. When you have an open house or you have a lot of operators who aren't used to layout and they come in, sometimes they're a little rough. This was the part I worried about because it has a duck under and it's not attached, and I have not had any problems, knock on wood, with this getting knocked around. It does help. There's most of my library of reference books are on the bottom, so it's really heavy. And that's a laser cut Craftsman kit from eBay. That is the section house that I'm going to use that section house throughout the layout. So my final thoughts, the sessions run from 2 to 3 hours. Usually we get all the work done. I've had a couple sessions where we timed out and I'll just go clean it up later. I'm down to 15 to 30 minutes to reset the layout if it ran well and if the yard ops do what they're supposed to do. We skip the passenger trains often due to time. The Racket Lake Railway was mainly a passenger line. It grates at me that we often skip that. When I go to most layouts, in the briefing that the owner gives, one of the first things you'll hear is, we're not going to run passenger trains. And that's something that I wish we need to get better at, running the passenger trains. But to run the passenger trains, that's one person's job for the night, to do all the different trains, in and out of staging, in and out of Racket Lake, and back and forth. It would be one person. I'd like to work on some more interchange work, Adirondack Division interchange work at Carter. I haven't figured out really how to work that in. Often the logging work doesn't get done. It models a logging line, and because we're so busy switching cars at the camp, we don't often get to the logging work. That's where having a floater of a person to come do that work, that's where that comes in handy. So far, the layout and the system worked as I hoped. It's a semi-prototypical design, like a proto-freelance layout, and it's fun to operate. We have a lot of fun. Most people find it really enjoyable. We take a break about an hour, hour and a half in, have some snacks, and come back. It's laid back, and most people have a really good time. So that concludes.
Well, we hope you enjoyed that visit with John. He is here with us. We have some questions that were put into the chat, John. First of all, somebody wanted to know what size the layout room is.
So the room is a renovated woodshed, and the layout itself is about 7 by 21.
Okay. Okay.
So it's pretty small.
Let's see. Do you have industries, and how does that define how your operations work?
So the biggest industries that I have is a sawmill. There's a pretty good sized sawmill at Carter, right on the Adirondack Division, that a lot of traffic comes in and out of there. But that's the only real industry. All my other sidings are, oil dealer, a coal dock, things like that. But there's no other heavy industry.
Okay. What time period do you model?
So I'm 1920. Fall, September, October, end of tourist season, beginning of hunting season. That was a way to kind of artificially boost the amount of traffic. That would be one of the heaviest times for traffic.
Okay. Okay. Makes sense. How did you print your car cards and waybills?
So those car cards and waybills that I use, I got off of, I want to say it's an old operations forum off the internet. And it's a template that is based on using business cards. A business card template allows you to print sideways, which then becomes upside down when you turn it.
Okay.
And I got them from somebody, I don't even remember. And then I customized them with colors and to match what I was doing.
Okay. Somebody wants to know, will this work on a small layout of 1 to 3 operators, or is 5 operators the minimum for this methodology?
We've run this layout with 3 people. None of the jobs are really dependent on each other. So if I don't have enough people to run one of the locals, I can just run it later. Nobody's waiting for those cars. And the yards can do all of their work, and none of their work, nobody's relying on cars coming out of the yards for that work. So it's really set up kind of modular. I could really run it with 2 people. All the cars you need are already in the yard. So you could just take them, split them up and do the locals, or you can just do the staging or whatever. But yes, as far down as 3 people, it's about as far down as I really want to go.
Okay. And I assume you can run it yourself if you just want to run one of the jobs or something?
Yep. A lot of times I'll clean up if we didn't get to something or whatever. But generally, I don't really run the layout a whole lot myself. I'm too busy working on it. So,
okay.
But I'll occasionally go out and run something around. There's a milk train that just runs through the layout. I'll go run that once in a while, really just to make sure that the layout's running okay.
Okay.
So.
Okay. Somebody wants to know, what tape do you use on the car cards?
What tape?
Tape. Yeah.
Yeah, I just use Scotch tape to
Scotch tape.
Yep.
Okay. And finally, what was something major that you changed from when you first started operating your layout to today?
The biggest thing, and I believe I mentioned it, is that we discovered that the logging job, you could not go to the logging camp with all of your setouts to do your pickups because there just wasn't enough room in the yard. So after the first session, it was a disaster on that line, and we realized that we had to split that into 2 jobs. Other than that, we've been very lucky. I haven't had to change anything in a major way. I did have to, the first couple of sessions, I didn't have the staging yard really down. So when I finished the staging yard, it went smoothly after that.
Okay. Well, that's all the questions we have. So thank you.
No problem.
The Hudson Berkshire Division has an Oktoberfest every year. I'm hoping to be able to get over there and run John's layout one of these days on that. Maybe you can too. Thank you very much, and hope to see you again.
I would ask. I'm on Facebook. The railroad's on Facebook. It's the Racket Lake Railway in N scale. you're more than welcome to come check out the progress.
Oh, good to know. All right.
Okay.
Thank you, John.
Thanks, everybody.
All right. So now we will move on. We will conclude tonight. Okay, so we will conclude tonight with part 2 of Jim Heights, Ogdensburg, and Norwood. As some of you may be aware, Jim has suffered an illness and is unable to continue to work on the layout himself, but his crew has kept it running. He's not able to be here with us tonight, but if there are questions, you can put them in the chat and we'll try and answer them for you. The layout will be a part of the Central New York Division's Ops to You drop in April. So enjoy the rest of your visit to the ONN.
Hi everyone, I'm Jim Height, and I'm pleased to welcome you to the Ogdensburg and Norwood, a layout based upon my family experience of operating a layout, a real railroad of that name, back when I was a kid in high school. So the layout is an HO scale. It's a large double-deck layout, and the main line extends over 400 feet. It takes 20 real minutes to run from point to point at a prototypical speed. But we've been building this layout now for the better part of 30 years, and I have a dedicated group of friends that come down every Tuesday night. Most of it is completed. We have JMRI, computer access, Digitrax control, and the layout is not completed. There's still some scenery work and work being done on it. And you'll probably see it along the way, but I couldn't be more pleased with what we have here and the friends that I have working on it. So I'm glad you're here. Let's take a ride on the ONN. Shows that there is yet another staging area built on top of the helix, which is the NERx Central's Adirondack Division coming out of Utica, all heading all the way up to Tupper Lake. And so that allows us another interchange with the NERx Central, which we'll talk about later when we get to Tupper. Now we're at the upper level now, coming out of the helix into Tupper Lake. And you may have noticed by now that all the station locations have lighted signs with notations underneath of it, which direction is heading north and which is south. And that's all to assist visiting operators so they can come and run this layout for the first time with some help. In any event, Tupper is a challenge. It was a challenge to design and to build, really. So what you'll see later, I'm sure, on a close-up photography is the track coming out of the top of the helix, which is the NERx Central in 1948, the Adirondack Division coming up from Utica. Now, originally it was the New York and Ottawa, and the New York and Ottawa ran from Utica all the way up through Tupper Lake, through Moira, up on the roof of the state crossing the Rutland, and off really going into Ottawa back years and years ago. So what we've done is we've tried to figure out how we could integrate an operation with the central. So here is the central line going straight back, and we had to figure out how can we disguise that. So what we did is we have a stub track going back with foliage and trees folding in over it, a highway bridge in the back on top of it, kind of to frame up the train which sits in that track. And we got a New York Central train here permanently located blocking the line. So the fiction is that north around Paul Smith's heading up toward Moira, there's a washout, okay? So trains coming up from Utica, they can't continue on this trackage. So what they do is they cross over onto the Ogdensburg and Norwood, and they run on trackage rights all the way to Potsdam, going north of Potsdam, where they can go back on the NERx Central trackage. So that fiction of having that washout and that dead end up there allows us to run NERx Central trains on this layout for a short distance, from Tupper to Potsdam and back and forth. So that's Tupper Lake. Here is the interchange track in the front with the NERx Central and the Ogdensburg and Norwood. And one of the fine details is the ballast is a different color than the ballast on the O&N. That's one very subtle way of making the distinction between the two lines. And that's Tupper. Over to my right is Long Lake. And Long Lake begins from here, stretches all the way along this aisle. And Long Lake Station is a station that I based the plans up by Don Andrews, where I wanted a combination station, restaurant, and hotel. So that's that was a combined effort, and it came out very well, if I don't mind saying so myself. Backing down, which we'll get a view of later behind me, at the upper end is Blue Mountain Lake. Blue Mountain Lake is the junction for the ore mines, for the branch line for the ore mines that comes into the main. But it also is it's a throwback in the passenger days of the Adirondack trains, which brought private cars up for people who had real money and parked them so they could go on excursions in the Adirondacks. So when you get down here with your camera, you'll see that there's a siding for a passenger car right in front of the station. And there's also an excursion boat, which was scratch built for me by Brian Curry. The only part that he didn't do really, well, no, I'm sorry. It was a 1x6 piece of lumber, which is the hull, and the rest of it he scratch built. And he named it for my prior wife, Suzanne, who had later passed away. I know taking a time with this video to talk about my dearest friends and what this region and division has meant to me. When I had a heart attack and I'm laying down in Utica in February during a blizzard, Brian Curry came from Weedsport, and he picked up my wife, who was afraid to drive, didn't know where to go in Utica, and drove her to Utica to see me in the hospital. I mean, that's the people that we have. That's who we are. And I'm thankful for that, of course. So take a good look at the boat Suzanne that Brian built for me. And over here to your right is Indian Lake. And the thing I'm proudest of in Indian Lake is the structure, which is the Indian Lake Box Company, which I scratch built and completely designed it. I mean, made templates for it, did a whole bunch of stuff, hoping to get my AP certificate for structures. And we're also currently working on building the front side, the street side of Indian Lake, so that when you're standing and watching the train, you see the train going through essentially the canyon of structures on either side of it, which is next to the canyon where the stream goes through Indian Lake in the Adirondack Mountains. The other thing is the turnout control, and I'll do this very quickly. This is a small mock-up that I made to demonstrate the construction, and this is really the only original idea I ever had on anything. I'm so proud of this. But the turnout control is a 1.5-inch PVC cap, which you buy in any of the big box stores, recessed into the fascia of the layout, because when you have a wider body like mine, it's better to have as much recess as possible. And sticking out through it is the item which we turn, and that's a lipstick tube, if you wonder what that is. And these lipstick tubes are clear so that a bicolor LED shows through, green indicating it's for the track going straight, and it turns yellow when you turn it and throws the motor for the diverging route on the turnout. So I don't know to the extent you can see this, but the rotary motion of the lipstick tube turns into lateral motion, which fires off this light switch, and that either opens or closes the circuit to do everything else. Running the motor, and this is a homemade turnout control motor that I had made early on, and there's still some of them on the layout. But now I'm changing all over to tortoises with some minor modifications. But this is still some of these are just toggles, and those are ones that do not read back to the computer for the JMRI, whereas the ones with the lipstick tube do go back so that this which way to signal. The DAC is again identical to the lower in terms of its configuration. Over here on the right is Speculator, and Speculator is scenically complete with exception for some very minor details to be added. It's one of the older sections of the layout having been completed, and it's just a switching location. The thing that's really significant to me is there's a coal dealer here, and the structure is a Muir Models kit, which is a model of a real structure that was behind the O&W station in Wurtsboro, New York, which was my parents' last home. They lived in the station. Half of it was their home, the other half of it was a museum, and that coaling tower is directly behind it. I think it's essentially collapsed now, but I'm very thankful I found it, and it has an emotional place on my layout. The opposite side here, excuse me, is Lake Pleasant. Lake Pleasant is the junction with the Utica branch, which is the track going on the back here, winding over to the staging that we looked at earlier. And these buildings are all scratch built. They're all scratch built, every one of them. The station here was a Don Andrews design of a structure that was in an old Kalmbach book that I had many years ago. And he modified it based upon my specifications. And Bob Verkel is the one who scratch built it. So again, more contributions from dear friends. That's Lake Pleasant. The upper deck is Wells. That's the next town north coming out of Northville. And Wells, there's nothing specific about it other than Wells happened to be the last community where Maribeth's father, who was a Wesleyan pastor, had his regular church, had regular church services. So Wells is kind of special to us. There was no railroad in Wells, and this is all fictional. This is the Dawson Springs section from the world famous Virginian and Ohio Railroad of Alan McClellan. Back in the late 70s, when I was in law school out in western Ohio, I had the great pleasure of operating on Alan's layout a couple different times. But it was years later, that after the construction of this layout really, that all of a sudden this piece became available. Brian Curry, who I mentioned before, had a very dear friend who was stationed in Dayton in the military. He went down there, found out that McClellan had cut up his layout, had it laying out on the front yard, and Brian just called me, did I want a piece of it? Of course, I said, sure. So Brian picked this up at no cost and brought it to me. And we modified this layout to stick this in here. This was the last piece added in. And I left the fascia the way it was on Alan's layout, obviously to pay honor to him and his world famous V&O. The construction of going further back, which is off camera now, is intentionally being a cut to design the difference between the V&O of Allen and Northville, which is the rest of my layout, and just having different geography, different scenery. And that's the reason for that cut. that's kind of off the scene. But I couldn't be happier to have a piece of Alan's layout here in the Ogdensburg and Norwood. So we're looking at the causeway over the Sacandaga. Sacandaga Lake is a artificial construction in reality. I believe that it was a modification to the valley through there to provide water for the New York State barge World War I. And it is a serious body of water even today. But in trying to figure out where the line was going through the Southern Division, I got down to Northville and continued south and had to cross the Sacandaga somehow because, of course, 1948, this is post-World War I. So I love the Rutland and pictures of the causeway of the Rutland across the north of Lake Champlain. And there's some photographs in there that are just beautiful. So I had to do that here in creating this causeway. And it's a nice variation, a distinction scenically from all the busyness in Ogdensburg situated physically below it, but giving you a whole different perspective. The background are all photos taken off of Bill Brown's Lark Products line, and we got to the point where we ran out of photographs and had to change it when we got down to the corner here. So I just happened to create this little island and put all these pine trees on it just to show to distract you, the visitor, from noticing the distinction between the views before the island and what's after the island. Just a little cheating visually. So the causeway was something new, and how did I do that? So the whole layout is built on a spline lattice roadbed, spline lattice topped by homosote, topped by what used to be called homa bed. And this is all code 70 trackage on the main line, except for storage and staging, which is code 100. So the spline is located on top of posts, and it all sits obviously independently. And I had to figure out what to do about the spline. So what I did is I cut masonite in a standard width at a standard length, which I believe is about 3 inches or so. And then on top of that, I just took chunks of foam, blue foam, the kind of stuff used in insulation and home construction, cut it up into chunks and just white glued it on to the foam. And then I painted it this semi-earth color, and on top of that, painted it this gray color. So they were just glued onto the side of this, going all the way down. The back side does not have that. The back side is open. It just has a little bit of riprap on the top, so somebody my height or a little bit higher can see that there's rocks on the other side, but it doesn't go all the way down. And this has been here for years, and it's held up pretty good. We need to touch it up with gray paint every now and then, but I couldn't be happier with how it looks. That's the causeway. Okay, so here we are at the terminal of the railroad, because the railroad really, again, is point to point. From Canada on the northern end, the Southern Division, and Pittsfield, Massachusetts on the southern end. So down here below is the elevator, the staging area, the staging yard, if you will, for Canada. And these are elevators that operate on threaded rod, half-inch threaded rod, with 24-volt DC motors on the end, running chain link connected to the sprockets on these threaded rods. And the whole thing operates down here on a microprocessor that Mike Lamond, one of our Tuesday night guys, had programmed and set up. So ideally, I'm not going to do it so it gets noisy, but ideally you push the button and there's 3 different levels here. I don't know if you can see it, but you push the button and it causes the whole thing to move and to end up where you want it on those 3 different staging tracks on each elevator. They run it independently. And the way it works, and Ed may get a close-up of it later, is there's a digital counter down by the motors on each one of these chains, and it actually counts the links as it goes by so it knows where to stop and where to start. So that's how that works, and all of the tracks are powered separately by different levels, so we're not wasting energy, just having DCC decoders chirping away, drawing up power. So we operate it that way. And here is the time. So that's the overview of the elevators.
So thank you. We hope you enjoyed your tour of the O&M. And that wraps up our first day of content for this year's NERx. I'm joined by my backstage crew of Peter Watson and Chuck Diljack, who've been feeding me the questions out of the chat and keeping me on task here. Please tune in tomorrow at 6:30 Eastern Time for another action-packed night of clinics, layout tours, and roundtable discussions. The schedule for the remainder of the NERx is on the nerx.org website, and it's also posted on the NMRA interchange. If you're not part of the interchange, why not? You need to get on there, get going. On behalf of the entire NER board, I want to thank all the volunteers that gave their time to making this event possible. Chuck Diljack, Pete Watson, Ed Olszewski, Dave Dewar, James Van Bachlen, John During, Chris Carfaro, Mark Moritz, Greg Williams, and Artie Crass, and others. Thanks also to the National NMRA crew, particularly Speed, for spending the week in his Hilux, helping us stream this great content. Thank you for attending, and we look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Have a good night.